Go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. City Clerk, may we have roll call? Yes. May. Mayor Daggett? Here. Vice Mayor Aslan?
Here.
Councilmember Harris? Here. Councilmember House? Here. Councilmember Matthews? Here. Councilmember McCarthy?
Here.
Councilmember Sweet? Here. Pledge. Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Aslan, would you give us the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pleasure.
Help us repeat it.
Stand as you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The mission of the City of Flagstaff is to protect and enhance the quality of life for all. Councilmember House, would you read the land acknowledgement?
Be my honor, Mayor. Flagstaff City Council humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by Native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Thank you very much. So, staff, what fun do you have in store for us today?
All kinds of fun, Mayor. I'll kick things off. I will quickly turn it over to our facilitator, Katie, who was introduced to you yesterday, and then she's going to hand it over to Heidi Derryberry. And today's agenda, as you can see, is mostly about budget. And this is the start of a very protracted and important process that will span the next several months, culminating in the ordinance sometime at the end of June, early July. And we know that that will now be very early July because we had that discussion yesterday. I want to thank you all for yesterday and your engagement. It was a great retreat. I also want to thank you for being here this morning. We know that it's very slow going out there. We hope that everybody was safe getting in here. And it's great that we could be a little bit nimble here and add 15 minutes to our start time. Katie will walk us a little bit through the time scheduling today. Going back to yesterday, I was remiss when I was offering up some gratitude for those who have prepared the venue and the wonderful meals and everything that we enjoyed yesterday. Councilmember Sweet, I forgot to mention your name, and I very much intended to do that. You always have a hand in things kind of behind the scenes, and I know that you had involvement in preparing yesterday's menu. I guess you're on the menu advising committee. So, yeah. Team structure, right? We really appreciate that. So thank you. Very thoughtful and much appreciated. Yes. We've already started this morning with an alliance meeting. It was well attended. It was, of course, virtual and good topics. Thank you all who attended that. So we are on our way. Katie, are you ready? And let's once again welcome Katie Vidicke.
So when it comes to the intro, I'm actually going to cut it short today so that we can make sure we have time for all of our agenda items today. But I wanted to say good morning, council members, vice mayor, mayor. And I wanted to just suggest that I heard a lot of great feedback about yesterday and what we discussed, and that's really great. And so as you progress forward, you might consider even adding things like appreciations to the end or beginning of your meetings that allow for an opportunity to connect. And that's just one short recommendation to consider. That being said, I can also talk about that more offline. So how is our schedule shifting today? Obviously, we are starting just 15 minutes a little bit later at 10:30. And I believe that our first presentation, we're going to try to shorten that a little bit. And then we're hoping to hit lunch around noon. And I will just notify you and shift it as we need to. But ultimately, the likelihood of us going till 2:45 is much higher. So I just wanted everyone to acknowledge that end time is just a little bit later. And just a reminder for those presenters that I'll give you a 5-minute warning that'll look like this piece of paper, and then a 1-minute warning. And that's just to help us stay on time. And are there any questions from presenters or anyone on the council? Okay, well, without further ado, let's get started.
Heidi Derryberry.
So good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. My name is Heidi Derryberry. I am the city's Assistant Finance Director, and I'm here this morning. Go to that one. First of all, just to talk briefly about our agenda, which you all have, I believe. We're going to start off with budget introduction, which myself and Brandy will be talking about that. We're going to talk about maintaining fiscal health, our priority-based budgeting system, revenue updates, and the budget team focus for the cycle, and then wrap the day up with some council expectations for our next retreat, which is less than 2 weeks away. So you'll get to see us all again back here in a couple weeks. That next retreat is much more detailed for budget. We will be diving into stuff today, really high level, just kind of introducing the process. With that, I just kind of want to introduce the budget team, which is a couple slides from now, but talking about our charter. A couple of years ago, we created an actual budget team charter for our group. We have been around, I don't know, long before I started, over 7 years, almost 7 years ago. But we actually created an official charter a couple of years ago. So I'm going to talk to you today about our purpose, our composition, the meetings we hold, the roles we have, and our code of conduct. So the purpose of the budget team is we are to provide financial advisement and strategic direction to the city organization and to protect the interests of the public through sound fiscal services. We do this through providing fiscal oversight and financial decision-making on an ongoing basis. We forecast short-term and long-term financial landscapes. We provide constant fiscal stewardship to ensure integrity, accountability, transparency, credibility, adaptability, excellence, and collaboration. And we proactively assure city fiscal stability through effective recession planning. All these smiling faces, our team is actually comprised of 12 different members. Currently, there's 11 of us since we have Heidi Hansen in an acting role as the Deputy City Manager. She is normally a member on the team in her Economic Vitality Director role. But our team is made up of Greg, Shannon, Hansen, Nicole, Scott, Rick, Randy, Brandy, myself, Chris, Rudy, and Jared. So you can see we have a pretty broad group. Until a few years ago, we were a team of 9. Our most recent adds were first we had Heidi Hansen join the team back right at the beginning, I think, of COVID to get kind of the economic vitality lens to help us on our team. And then I believe a year ago is when Nicole joined us, so we could start looking at everything we do through the lens of sustainability. And then our most recent member we added just a couple months ago is Scott Overton from Public Works to kind of start letting us have someone from the operations side of the city on that team. Because before you could see there was a lot of people from the CMO's office as well as finance, which obviously makes sense with budget, but it's great for us to get some other perspectives on the team. So we're forever a growing team. We also have Jared, who is our EAC rep. I don't believe he's here with us today, but that's who makes up the composition of our team. Meetings. So right now we meet every single week on Thursday mornings at a minimum. As needed, we meet multiple times a week or a month. Especially during COVID, we met almost daily. So I think we all were getting a little tired of each other during that time. But there was so much going on, we just couldn't keep up with the changes and looking at things. So we met almost on a daily basis. And then we found it's really beneficial to us to meet weekly. So we do meet every week, at least once a week. Some other meetings we have a biannual priority-based budget council retreat, which I think you heard about maybe a little bit. In September of the odd years, we will be holding those meetings. We have a budget team retreat where we begin early in October is where we start talking about the budget. So obviously many months before we even get before you guys. Council budget retreats. We have a January retreat, which is what you're in today. And then we have a February retreat and an April retreat. Then as a budget team, we have division review meetings, which are part of the budget process where we talk with every division about all their requests and needs. And that is actually 15 days straight that the budget team meets together. This year we'll be meeting in this room, talking with everybody about budget. And then as needed, as I mentioned, during recessionary or emergency response times, we will have extra meetings. So we have many roles that we have on the budget team. We talk about strategic leadership role, where we do strategic planning to bolster the city's financial health. We do an assessment role where we are assessing organizational expenditures through PPP methodologies to ensure that our program services and resources are aligning with our community priorities. We have a budgetary role, providing oversight of the formulation of the annual city budget for adoption by council. And then just a leadership development role. We encourage and nurture the development of present and future skilled members. We've had several different employees from the city that have joined the budget team just to come and hear what we do and just as a learning opportunity. Our code of conduct, hopefully is no surprise. We try to be professional, respectful, and courteous of each other. We acknowledge the sensitivity of discussions. The budget team oftentimes is talking about personnel changes, compensation changes, recessionary planning. So we talk about a lot of things before they're made organizational knowledge. So we just are sensitive of the stuff we talk about. We make attendance a priority. We arrive on time and we're present and engaged. We allow conversations to be inclusive and provide time for all members to participate. And we use consensus for decisions. Moving on, out of the charter and onto kind of our overall budget process. The diagram you see before you just is a really high level chart of what we do. So the very first little orange square you see over there is today's retreat. So we kick off with a high level budget introduction retreat each year. And then kind of at the same time this is going on, all the divisions are back working diligently to be putting in their new budget requests, their needs, preparing their personnel requests. All that's happening. We're compiling that information right now. Then in 2 weeks, like I mentioned, we're going to be back here for the February budget retreat. That retreat, we'll start introducing, we're going to talk about very high level revenue today. We'll start talking about more revenue information that we are working on right now. We'll talk about some of the fixed costs that we know. We do have some information on our increases to pension rates, health benefits, some of those things. As we are starting to get more information, we'll start disseminating that. Then, right after that, we have all the new requests going into our budget system, and the budget team will start reviewing those. That's the 3 weeks I said that we sit and talk. We look at every request that the entire city is putting in and evaluate whether we can fund it, if it's a high priority, low priority. Looking at that against the priorities and objectives of PPP. And then we come back, we have a 2-day retreat in April where we talk about the city manager's recommended budget. After that, we go back, make any changes if needed or modifications, and then we start the approval process. We go to the public hearing for the property tax level adoption as needed if we're going to do an increased property taxes. We do an adoption of the tentative budget, final adoption of the budget, property tax levy adoption, and then we implement on July 1st our new budget. Here's just some important timeline, budget timeline items for council. Starting this today, we're in our retreat. February 2nd and 3rd is our next council budget retreat. And then April 27th and 28th is where city manager will be bringing back the recommended budget to the council. June 6th is where we're scheduled for the tentative budget adoption. The 20th of June is where we have the property tax levy hearing first reading of the property tax adoption and final budget adoption. And then finally, on July 3rd, the final reading of the property tax adoption. Any questions on any of that? If not, I'm going to hand it over to Brandy. She's going to come talk about fiscal policies.
I do have a question, not necessarily about that, but I don't see the budget retreat on our agenda. I mean, on our calendars.
Which one?
February. Oh, the one that Sean gives you?
It is?
It was.
Okay, what's the date?
February 2nd and 3rd.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll make sure you get that on your calendar.
All right.
Thank
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for letting me.
27th, 28th.
Yeah, that's the April retreat. We'll certainly work with the city office to get all that information in your calendars.
I might have just missed it.
Okay. Bye.
Heidi.
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Brandy Suda, serving as your the city's finance director. So I'm going to review with you the city's key guiding fiscal policies, and then we're going to have a short presentation on color of money, as it's a huge component of how we budget as a city. So fiscal policies. So the city budget is not simply an exercise of balancing revenues and expenditures 1 year at a time. It is strategic in nature. It encompasses multi-years of planning and operating plans, allocate resources based on identified goals, specifically related to all of our priorities. We'll talk a little bit more about our funds and how we plan in these 5 years, many times 10-year outlook, all of our priorities. Something we promise today to deliver. Fiscal policy maintaining an adequate fund balance between 10 and 25% of budget. The fund how to maintain an adequate and what balance. Receptor as well as when the funds help support the city tax improve this time.
Thank you.
Zoom.
So special revenue funds. So these funds are used to account for revenues derived from specific taxes or other earmarked revenue sources, and are usually required by state statute, charter provisions, or ordinance to fund a particular function or activity within the city.
It's just making sure I get my extra back today.
Let's make s'mores.
There you go. Thank you, Stacy. So here are a list of all of our special revenue funds we have at the city. So we have our housing and community services funds. This is where our CDBG, our community development block grant funds are, as well as other sources we get in related to housing. We have our library fund. So our library services is funded with a secondary property tax from the county, as well as a general fund transfer from the city for a portion of the city services related to the library. We have our highway user revenue fund, or often referred to as HERF, and this is our gasoline tax. So this is how our streets operations is funded with the city. We have transportation tax. This is the 1.281 tax, and we actually have this fund is broken actually into 4 additional funds. So we have our transit fund, we have our road repair, street safety, the Lone Tree, our Route 66 overpass, as well as our transportation improvements. So we track all of those separately. Yes.
Are all those taxes, because I know the one thing was, that are listed there, voted in by the
By the
voters?
voters. Yes, that is correct. So they all have various expiration dates, but they're all tracked under that transportation tax.
Do you know what percentage of the HERF funds go to, or how much of our streets are funded through HERF funds?
So all of our streets operations are funded within the HERF fund.
And that hasn't been increased, and do you?
So
that?
I will have to look to see when's the last time the state increased that tax, but it is a very volatile revenue source, right? As gasoline tax, as cars become more efficient, they use less taxes, and my understanding, it is a percent. I don't know what that percent is of the tax.
First of all, I thought it was per gallon.
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. You are. It's a per gallon. It's an amount per gallon.
Yes, and then the second thing is, it's been, I don't know the exact, but it's been over 25 years since it's increased. So in effect, it's decreased because of inflation.
And more efficiency, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Electric.
Yes. Yes. So it is one of the challenges.
So as we move into more electric cars, are there any plans out there for the state to figure out how we might tax that, or is that going to be possible, or you don't know?
I know there has been some discussions about a different tax maybe on electric vehicles. I don't know. Rick Tatter probably has more knowledge of that. I have not heard anything that has passed yet related to that. But yeah, I'm gonna phone a friend.
Rick Tatter.
Yeah, it seems like frequently through the legislative sessions, we do hear them talking about a new way of funding streets operations. At one point, they talked about a motor vehicle tax or registration tax that would be added to vehicles. But they kind of fizzle out through the end of the legislative process. They really haven't made many changes, but that pops up occasionally. They've talked about increasing the rate also, but again, they kind of fall near the end of sessions. But we'll keep an eye on it.
Ask a question. When we pay our registration for our license plates, where does that money go? Does some of that go into HERF?
The vehicle license tax goes into the general fund. It's not restricted for streets.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Know-it-all.
Yeah.
It took years.
He's Rick Tatter. He's Rick Tatter.
Rick Tatter.
Some of our other special revenue funds include our BBB, or the board and beverage tax, at 2%. So again, this is another fund that is broken out into 5 separate funds. Beautification gets 20%, economic development gets 9.5%, tourism gets 30%, arts and science gets 7.5%, and recreation gets 33% of this tax. We have Park Flag, go ahead.
Can you remind me when that's up for discussion again? It's coming up, right?
It is coming up. So we just looked this up. So it expires March of 2028. So I believe we'll be talking about that in 2024 as a possible bond or election. We have Park Flag. So this is our downtown parking district. So, fees related to permits and pay to park funds our operations of Park Flag. We have our water resource and infrastructure protection fee that is on our municipal bill. And so this is a fee that funds wildland operations.
Does Airbnb, did they pay this BBB tax?
So BBB taxes, so Airbnbs, yes, they do. Sorry. Thank you.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah, please do.
So the park flag, does it only fund the operation for the staff and cars and all of that stuff? So it doesn't fund anything else except that? Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct. It funds, all of our funds, if we're allowed, pay like a cost allocation, which is like an indirect cost for support services. So everybody, based on a cost allocation study that we do annually, they help pay for finance, legal, the city manager's office, purchasing, that kind of stuff. So there is a small related to that, but really it only funds things related to parking.
So then can I just follow up? So say, for example, Park Flag has an amazing year. I mean, everybody is going downtown and parking, buying stuff, and they have all this money left. What would happen to that?
It stays within that fund and grows into fund balance. So if they either spend less or exceed their revenue expectations in that fund, it rolls into the next year. So then they can reallocate it to other items or, what the priority is for that fund. So it stays there. This Park Flag does have, they call it the lockbox. So 20% of this revenue is already additionally restricted for the purchase of additional parking in the downtown area.
You mean additional parking spaces like?
Yep. Whether it's,
garages or
whether
whatever?
it's a surface or a garage, yep. So 20% of those revenues are going into that
So
lockbox each year.
they would use that to buy property to build that stuff on, or build stuff?
Yes, they
The
could.
garage.
And just to piggyback on that, wasn't when we started charging for parking downtown, wasn't it proposed that it was going to eventually pay for a parking structure?
Yes.
And then you're saying that the 20% restricted, that fund is building up to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
It's doing quite well.
So even within Park Flag, we have two restrictions, right? They have their operations as well as the lockbox for future parking.
Did some of that money go towards the new parking that we now have at the old church school? Or the senior living place?
No,
No.
and we could have a discussion about that independently. They're the finance team, and we came up with some good solutions to fund that. So they are, I don't want to say it's fully appropriated, but we have a plan.
So,
Yeah.
so far the lockbox is just growing, and at some point we'll use it.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
So those are our special revenue funds. We also have our enterprise funds. So these are funds that are self-supporting through user fees. Usually it's a user fee ordinance that restricts the use and dictates the amount charged for water, wastewater, trash charges, as well as they can be rent or airport leases and fees. So some of these funds include our water funds. We track water specifically, wastewater, reclaimed water, and stormwater. So that's all within water services, but we have a fund for each of those that tracks the specific revenue related and their fees. We have our solid waste fund. So this is our collections and landfill services that we provide. We have our sustainability and environmental management fund, our airport for all the revenues that we receive from the airport related to landing, car rental, leases, etc. And then our Flagstaff Housing Authority is also an enterprise fund.
So my understanding of the enterprise fund is that nothing goes into it or out of it. It's its own. It supports itself. However, correct me if I'm wrong, the airport is an exception to that we take general fund money, put it into the airport.
We used to.
Yeah.
We are working really hard, and we haven't had to in a while for operations related to the airport. But we are working really hard to make it self-sufficient fund. But you are correct. All of these funds, the intent of those funds as an enterprise fund is that their user fees support 100% of their operations.
So we're transitioning on the airports.
Yes.
Yes, and it's a very good question. And stay tuned. you will be seeing updates and eventually implementation of paid parking at the airport. Just one of a few revenue streams, the eventual revenues on the 31.45 acre parcel being another. So there's a really good plan in place to see the airport function as an enterprise through time. But as Brandy noted, it's been a bit of a journey to get there, which brings me to one other comment. You know, when the enterprise status with our is typically utilities that it's associated with, stormwater, solid waste, airport, it's quite possible to go in and out of enterprise status from one year to the next as various projects occur. Sometime down the road, we'll be building a new wastewater treatment plant. Almost certainly, there's going to be outside funding, significant funding to capitalize that. It will not be shouldered upon great revenues and other things. It's just an illustration that from time to time, you know, we go out of enterprise status and look to other things, especially when there's significant capital building at hand.
I think a great example is the BBB, right? For
clarification.
I think with our new GeoBond projects, right, that just got for our infrastructure related to wastewater.
So just to clarify, Greg, like stormwater, the capital improvements that we are facing and stuff, there's a possibility that we could go for general funds?
Not likely general fund, and we'll be talking more about that, council members. An excellent question, but likely from other sources. We've been very creative, and I don't want to steal others' thunder here. There's going to be a lot of discussion about how we have financed things over time. The general fund is healthy, but it's probably not going to fix a lot of the things we're talking about or address them.
Shannon?
Brandy, I'm wondering if it's a good opportunity with the questions about general fund, if we talk a little bit about how the general fund has to supplement sustainability and environmental management due to some of those legislative restrictions.
That is, thank you, Shannon. That's a really good point. We do transfer money in from the general fund into sustainability and environmental management for some of those items that aren't eligible to be paid for with the sustainability fee. There are certain pieces, you know, I'm not the expert on what those are right off the top of my head, but certainly with the carbon neutrality plan, we have to evaluate each of those requests to determine if sustainability funds can be used to pay for those, because there are a lot of state restrictions on how we can spend those user fees. So we also have capital project funds. So our capital project funds are used to account for major capital acquisition separate from operations. So usually there's a restricted funding source, a lot of times voter approved GEO bonds, grants, other bonds, or other third-party restricted funds. We have our general obligation bond projects fund. This is where we have, right now, we have our floods and open space bond money. We have a little bit of money left from that bond. This is how we funded core services facility, the watershed protection $10 million GEO bond, as well as our new propositions 441 and 442 related to infrastructure and housing. Those will be capital projects funds separated from operations. We also have our USGS campus extension. So we have authorization to issue debt should we get into an agreement with GSA for a new building or USGS. Our courthouse was also funded in a capital project fund, as well as now the downtown mile. Many times related to capital project funds is our debt service funds. So these funds are used to account for the accumulation of resources to then pay for the debt service payments on our long-term debt. Usually there's a restricted revenue source related to them. We currently have two debt service funds with the city. We have our general obligation bond fund. So this is funded with our secondary property tax and pays the debt service on our those GEO bonds as payments are due. We also have our pension bond fund. So this is fairly new over the last couple of years. So this pays the debt service that we issued on those certificates of participation to pay down our PSPRS unfunded liability. And this fund is actually funded with a transfer from the general fund, the Water Resource Infrastructure Protection Fund, as well as the airport, since those are the three funds that have police and fire personnel related to them. So they pay a proportionate share. And then lastly is the general fund. So if we don't have a way to pay for those services in any of those other funds, it essentially counts for everything else. So any unrestricted revenues, so this is our 1% sales tax, many of our state shared income taxes, our primary property tax, as well as expenditures just to finance traditional services associated with the municipal government that are not accounted for in any other fund. So in other words, everything else. So what's funded in there is, police, fire, finance, the city manager's office, community development, IT. We are all funded within and are in the general fund. And many others, Parks and Rec. So some of those key revenues that come from, that are in the general fund is, again, our 1% city sales tax, our franchise taxes, our primary property tax, state shared revenues, including our sales, income, and vehicle license tax, our licenses and permits, so building permits, fines and forfeitures related to court, and user fees related to those funds that are in the general fund, such as community development, recreation, police, fire, and cemetery. So there are a lot of demands on the general fund. And as you will see, we spend a lot of time talking about the general fund because that's where is a very large portion of our budget, as well as usually has the most demands on that fund.
With the passing of the flat tax for the state, 0.8, whatever it is there a projection of that revenue, state shared revenue going up or down, or?
We do have a projection on that, and I think Rick's going to talk about that in his slides related to revenue. So I'll save that. Yeah. Okay. Any questions about color of money or fund accounting? It's kind of like we have little separate checking accounts for all of our different funds. We don't do it quite like that, but that's kind of, we have a ton of different businesses that we operate, and we track all of those revenues and expenditures separately. So thank you.
Let's give Randy and Heidi a round of applause, and you get a gold star early. And then, of course, a round of applause for the all-knowing Rick Tatter. Yeah. Rick, this is what this will look like. You're going to stay on time, huh?
I need a minus.
I know.
We'll go a little past.
You already flashed it at you.
Yeah. I missed the slide. Any questions? This section, we're going to talk about maintaining fiscal health. We're really proud of our organization, the efforts we make to make sure that we have the ongoing resource to meet the needs of our community and plan very well and be fiscally strong in our community. And so we're going to talk about recession planning, fiscal responsibility, and fund balance reserves are the main things that we talk about when we're talking about fiscal health over our city of Flagstaff. So we're going to talk about recession planning first. This is something that the budget team took a lot of effort on. We started in the fall of 2019. We saw revenues declining in our general fund, our sales tax, and the city manager brought forward a prototype from a city he worked with for us to develop our own that fits the city of Flagstaff. And budget team took that task and started working on it over from that fall to eventually adopting it in March 2020. You know what happened in March 2020. We were very timely on actually getting that up in front of council for some type of adoption. So timing was great, and we really used that plan during the COVID pandemic as we were watching our resources. So we adopted in March, and shortly after that, we went into recession planning and actual measures related to that plan. I'm just going to talk about high level with that recession plan today. We do have a copy of it. We forgot to include it in the packet. But if you want to take one and pass it around, We're not going to quiz you on it today, but this is our current recession plan we have. So the plan, we'll talk about, the purpose of planning for recession in that document, understanding what the indicators are that you may want to watch for and gain perspective of when we may go into recession, understanding that different funds have different impacts that they may see in certain periods. Our reserves, our fund balances are very important to watch. And the recession plan is not something that is necessarily part of budget. It's something that overlays on top of budget. We do our projection, we do our best to plan where we'll be with our resources, but if there's bumps in those revenues coming in, then we start putting a layer on top of that and looking at the recession plan to guide us through those months or years. It's very adaptable in how we implement. This is something that we've worked as a budget team. We don't want it to be over restrictive, but we want to have some kind of measures and have our staff and understand where we may be going when we have losses in revenues in the future. A key component is that if we move to a significant stage, and that stage is the 5% revenue loss up to 10% revenue loss, and then we have stages above that, we're going to come to you as council and ask for council action to move forward in the recession plan. So we have a check-in with council to make you aware we're seeing these impacts and have you approve going to the next measures within that recession plan. We'll talk a little bit about those in a coming slide. Here. So the recession plan is primarily focused on managing your expenditure side, right? We know where the revenue's going. We start projecting that, so we got to talk about the expenditure side. What are we going to do? What are we going to spend? So that's where we start to take our focus is more on the operation side versus the capital side. Capital is your projects and equipment, and that's that kind of items, which are a little more adaptable during a pandemic, but it's your operation expense that you want to manage. We want to do this while maintaining the right service levels in our organization. So it's not like we're going to drop police and fire or really safety related issues. We're going to still focus those expenditures during a recession to make sure we're not making a harm to our community. We want to stay focused on the health of our community. CIP plans, they have an opportunity to adjust their plan and timing of their capital projects over the next several years if we have less revenues than we need to build things. And some projects may outright be deferred if the revenues are that bad. Like we said, we focus generally on the general fund is really a barometer. We talked about that yesterday a little bit. How the general fund rolls, kind of the rest of the organization kind of moves along with. And as a measure, the general fund is 22% of our operating budget, so it's a big proportion of what we do in our community. But we don't want to just cut everything. We also want to be strategically thinking about how do we get out in the community and build revenues and move forward during these times. An example that we use very effectively with the COVID recession is invest more in the tourism dollars. Talking to the community, bringing people in. Amazing outreach that team did at Discovery Flagstaff to keep involved, still having the awareness of the pandemic and the responsibility, but that effort really paid off. It helps lessen the impacts of the VVV taxes. Construction, you may want to keep construction going in your community. You may want to keep those projects moving so people are still making incomes and being part of our community and growing. So those are some of the things we look at as far as a budget team. It's not all about cutting expenditures. This slide is a perspective of the stages that we have. We have 5 stages within our recession plan that we built. I can't read it back there. The minor alert, if we're starting to lose up to 2% in revenues, it's not a hard one to manage, but there's some things we can do. Just let's talk about reasonable expenditures, maybe reducing maybe a little bit of training or what have you. And then we move through the categories here as we move from a 2 to 5%, 5 to 10, and then it gets really into major and crisis mode. A perspective, the Great Recession was about a 13% loss in revenues in our sales tax. So we're talking, that's a major category. We've got to make some strong decisions in our organization. But that's why you see when we get to significant, major, and crisis, we need your conversation. We're going to come to council. We're going to have these conversations. These are some measures that we want to talk about. We hope we don't get there, but we will work with you and we'll work together to get through these types of recessions. That's it for recession. I don't know, Greg, if you want to add anything to that.
Well,
or
thanks.
council have questions.
Thank you for a great presentation. I'll give a little more context.
Don't take too much of my
I
time.
won't. Am I okay? Do I have another minute?
Yes, city manager, you have a minute.
Back to the comment about, had the recession plan been in place during the Great Recession, we would have seen it go to the major stage, which is pretty dire, right? At that point, we are looking potentially at a lot of things, including drawing down on reserves and cutting back on salaries and possibly service cuts and reductions in our labor force. I want to bring you back to this slide we showed yesterday about our employment, the bar graph that showed the number of employees. Do you remember that big dip that occurred in 2009 and 10? That was significant, and that would be an illustration of this. Of course, we're coming to council before those kinds of measures are taken. The very beginning part of this, the first two phases, we can handle that administratively, and we would give you updates as to that. But as we progress through this plan and things get more austere and with great consequence on the table in terms of the actions we take, we're making those decisions collaboratively with the council. It rises to that level. So fortunately, we have not been there since the Great Recession. We went to the significant stage a couple of years ago during the global pandemic. No reduction in workforce, of course, because of the pandemic. We lost employees for another reason. That being, we had to shutter many of our facilities, but it was not economically based. That was based upon a global pandemic. So different circumstances. Anyway, that would be a good illustration how this plan would have worked back in 2009 and 10. Thanks, Rick.
I have a question. If this is one of those way out in wherever field, what ifs? So we've all been kind of listening to Congress talking about the debt ceiling. So what happens if by any remote possibility somebody gets crazy and they don't raise it? I'm serious, because we never thought we'd be in a pandemic. We never thought we'd be in a pandemic either, but there we were. So I always like to kind of play the what if.
Definitely have faith that they won't let our country shut down and go through that. I haven't really looked at what the respects would be, but really it's going to be the lending faith of our country is going to be what the major trigger is. Being able to have the right interest rates and so forth, they may go skyrocket. That may be one of the major impacts we have. The credit on our community, which means then it then falls to our local community for us to issue debt will also be impacted. A couple percentage increase in a debt issuance is a big issue. You can do less. You'll have to do less in order to do the same.
So it would be worse than the recession that we had. Whatever.
I don't know if that would be a cause of the recession. It may be an indicator. But there's a lot of things that go into a recession, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow.
Okay.
Consumer.
We're coming in on Saturday?
Yeah, Saturday,
We'll
Rick.
talk about the next tree.
Stay tuned.
I do when you get it.
work. I tell you, a lot of shoveling.
And I don't want us to go into a whole long thing about that, but I'm just, I mean, is your team thinking about that? Do y'all think about those kinds of things, even though they're way out there?
I have not heard any of the economists. Those are the ones I really rely on and listen to them. I haven't heard any of them throw the warning signs of a major recession due to Congress inaction. We'll keep listening to them. That's where I get a lot of my information. It may be something for the next retreat. I can maybe do a little more research for them. So
related to Ms. Harris's comment, it may be that the federal government doesn't shut down or whatever, but they might, and this is part of the question, they might cut back on how much money they send to states and cities. So that could impact our budget. So I guess the question is, how much do we rely on money from the state feds as opposed to raising our own money like through sales tax, etc.?
I'll look at more into that. They may not fund like our community development block grant to the level that we really need.
Right,
they may start cutting back on programs from that aspect. But some of those things that are already authorized by Congress, I don't know that it'll slow too many of those down. They've already been authorized and then moving forward.
And the other point is, before we can get to a recession plan, we do have reserves, which.
Thank you.
Next.
Well. Next one. Oh, you're one off. A couple slides. We got fiscal responsibility first.
Okay.
And Brandy spoke to this a little bit earlier in her presentation, but we're a fiscally smart community finance team organization. We make sure that all of our 5-year plans are structurally balanced. We want to make sure that the ongoing revenues meet the ongoing needs and just use those one-time increase in revenues toward one-time items, making sure we can deliver in the long range. We do this through making sure our revenues are achievable and something we can reach. There's a little conservative side to when we are projecting our revenues because we don't want to be in a spot where we can't keep delivering services in the long run. We've reserved revenues for one-time use, especially those cash balances. So you'll see, not tomorrow, but this afternoon, a little bit about how our general fund ended last fiscal year. Those gain in revenues become one-time revenues for this year, but then we project out for how we can use the ongoing growth. Our fund balance policies, such as our general fund, have a 20% minimum fund balance. We'll talk about those in the coming slides. We build recessions into our revenue projections. So you'll see in February, we're going to get into the details in February. I'm not going to have a lot of details right now, but you'll see that I am putting some type of recession outlook for next fiscal year. The talk is out there, but then we know that it's cyclical. Every 7 years or so, on average, we should be planning for these downturns. So our plans all have this bump in revenues or reduction in revenues over time. We build those in. And of course, the annual budget process is a key to being fiscally stable. By being fiscally responsible, this is just something just to share and maybe toot the horn of this organization is there's a financial impact. The better you do, the better you can issue your debts, lower interest rate, saving tax dollars in our community. The city is consistently receiving a high rating on our bond measures. Most recently, we even did the pension financing in the summer of COVID during a recession, and we still received an AA minus for those types of bonds. General obligation bonds are your best rating, and generally other types of bonds, revenue bonds, and so forth, are just one step lower in the organization. So it was incredible that we got that rating during an economic recession and a COVID pandemic. Our current rating on geo bonds is an AA stable during that process a while back. for Standard & Poor's and AA2 for Moody's. Those are our most recent ones we did. So here you can see we are up in that high grade of a debt. So when we go out to the public, offer our debt, they're fighting. They're trying to buy the bonds in increments that they want to invest in. They see us as we're going to pay our bills. So definitely favorable on our city. Now we'll talk about fund reserve, fund balance reserves. Page off here. Fund balance reserves are really important for any organization, for cities, states, and so forth. We try to follow our Government Finance Officers Association and guidelines when we're talking about fund balances within the city of Flagstaff. Understanding what are the best practices for our reserves. You know, we don't want to be over reserving funds because there's things we can get done, but we don't want to set ourselves in an area that we're too low on our reserves. These policies assist us with those economic risks that we may see in the coming years. It's not necessarily an emergency fund to spend. It's just managing your revenues. If your revenues don't match, you still got the cash reserve to deliver services. The guidance provides us a way of setting an appropriate level, use of replenishment of the funds. If you actually have to go into those reserves, how do you get them back up to a level? And then a couple keynotes. Fund balances are a balance sheet account. There's something that sits in your liabilities and equity, but it's not something that's cash that's available to spend in a time like in your recession. It's not a budgeted item. It's really a matter of managing. If revenues go down, your cash is being used in your balance sheets, not a new expenditure to be made. So they're not available for spending each fiscal year, but mainly that placeholder for decline in revenues, which is a key thing to understand. And I'm going to go through these next couple slides a little high level, but setting the appropriate levels. There's several key components that GFOA provides us when we're talking about these types of policies. Your revenue stabilities, your expenditures volatility. You know, if you have high gas prices, you know, we're dealing with a little bit of that right now. How do you manage through that time? How do you leverage your funding with grants and so forth? Extreme events, we know about those. We've seen a few of those over the last couple of years. Cash flow, reliance on funds, your growth projections, and your capital projects all calculate into what your policy should be for that percentage of fund balance reserve. Then on the other side, once you get into an economic recession and you start to deplete your fund balances because of loss in revenues, you think about, how do I get back there? How do we get back to that level? Because, you know, this is going to be cyclical. You generally use those one-time revenues to replenish your fund balance. And really, you're looking at this as a financial bridge. It may not be the next year you get it replenished, and maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line, you get back up to a adequate level.
Hey, Rick,
Yes.
can you talk about how ARPA funds helped us in that regard? The replenishment.
Yeah. ARPA funds is a little interesting way to look at things for the city. We definitely lost revenues at the city of Flagstaff, but we actually were planning reduction in revenues in our plans, our 5-year plans. I'm going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow also.
Not tomorrow.
Tomorrow, I can say tomorrow.
You can do it tomorrow, but you'll have a small audience.
My tomorrow is the afternoon. It was more of a boost than getting us through the time, because we've made those recessionary changes in our community that we weren't relying on those 100% just to pay back our revenue loss. So we were able to find those ARPA funds to get specific tasks done instead of just replace the revenues, put it in fund balance. Because we really, fiscally strong, recession planning, we were ready to weather that storm. So I think the ARPA funds were more of a boost to our community to do more in our community than it was to replace fund balances. Right?
Thank you. Yeah,
Just my off the cuff
no, that's good.
response on that. So generally, we want to do a 1 to 3 year period. You got to look to make sure your recession could be more than 1 year, right? The Great Recession was 18 months, so that was like a 2 fiscal year period. So it's not like you're going to jump into it and get it back. You're going to have to wait to see that upturn, and then over that 1 to 3 years, you want to replenish that and get that in place. Through the budget process, we plan to get those funds back. And then as you see your revenue growth, you may not put all your revenue growth toward new programs at that point. Put money back into the pot to your fund balance reserves. So as far as policies that we currently have within our funds, Brandy talked about all the different color of monies a little bit before this. And our general fund, we have set at a 20% fund balance level. We feel this is a very sound spot to be. We don't recommend going any lower. It's about $15 million. Equates that 20%. We've done the modeling through GFOA. They've got a model to talk about risks and calculate what that percentage is. And their model is 17 to 25% is where a good spot for a general fund should be. So we're right in that target. You know, we could go a little higher. I would not recommend going lower, especially leading into potential recession periods. Then we have our other special revenue funds are generally at 10%, with the exception of the highway user fund. We make that one a little bit higher. That's a little more volatile. We understand the volatility of gas taxes, people not traveling, more efficient vehicles and so forth. We have a 20% policy there. Our enterprise funds are at 10%. However, our water services funds, that division made a responsible choice and went to council about a water policy. And in their policy, they set 25% for their enterprise funds. Capital projects are 10%. And we constantly review and make sure these fund balances are at the appropriate level. Knowing we may be going to recession, we may want to bump these up for these other funds from 10%, maybe a little higher, just to assure we can manage through the potential recession that we may see. No sign yet?
Not yet. You got 1 minute till you get a sign.
1 minute to 5 minutes. We're pretty close. This slide is almost a duplicate. I don't know how I missed that, just a little busy. But again, talking about reasonable estimating, recessionary periods and so forth, one-time focus on cash balances and so forth. I'm not going to talk much there. And I can't say more than we have a dedicated professional staff. This whole organization has amazing people. During the pandemic, people stepped up and actually reduced expenditures. We saved $2 million in a 3-month period of operating expenses because we knew we had to tighten our belts. And so, you don't have to rush.
No.
We're grateful that the team steps up. And then our management service staff, I'm really proud of them. They're dedicated professionals. They consistently receive a certificate of achievement for our financial reporting, our annual financial report, as well as our distinguished budget presentation that are endorsed by the highest level of Government Finance Officers Association. And on our procurement side, we consistently get the procurement award for excellence in procurement for our organization. We know it's important since we are the central location for these types of services, we want to be on top of our game. And this team definitely is. I just have a chance to learn from my staff, and then I got 4 minutes left.
Tell a
Any
joke.
questions?
Yeah, tell us a joke.
Tell us a show.
No, I'm not good at jokes.
Come on.
You can tell it's no-
I'm terrible at jokes, but I got one if you don't. I got a numbers joke.
Good.
Numbers, Joe?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, does it
Why?
involve spreadsheets or
Why,
what?
why was 6 afraid of 7?
Yeah.
Okay, well, some days are better than others.
All right. Any questions?
I like that one.
I have a question, Rick.
Yes.
Can you go back to the percentages of fund balances and let's drill down just for a second on capital projects fund? This is more to prompt thought and not necessarily to solicit an answer. But we're seeing our across the board capital projects are escalating like faster than we can budget for it. The increases are astronomical, whether it be concrete, steel, labor, all of the above. And I'm just wondering if we should be thinking about our fund balance in the capital projects because of that. It just seems like we are now having more and more discussions about how do we backfill funds on projects that have gotten away from their budgeted appropriations. We had one of those conversations just this week. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So our capital project funds, it's a multi-year. It's usually tied to taxes, multi-years, and many projects. It's very rare we ever get down to 10% in our capital project funds. Right, Brandy? We actually have a lot of reserves built up in many of our capital project funds. The reason we haven't gone higher than 10% is this capital projects are adaptable. You look at scope of work, you change your scope of work to fit in with your resources over time. And it's not something that a one-year blip will have an immediate impact. You'll have time over a 5-year plan to adjust your capital projects. But absolutely, yeah, there's going to be some strains. There's going to be scoping of projects that the projects team, engineering and so forth, we have to figure out how to deliver. I think we've been very fortunate on a lot of our revenues right now are exceeding projections, so they're in a good spot right now.
Okay.
But it's something we watch with our capital projects teams. Our accountants meet with them, talk about their planning and revenues quite often.
Thanks.
Make a quick comment. I think the city council is really lucky to have such a competent staff because it kind of makes our job easier when you do all of it. So thank you. You and the team. Yeah.
Thank you.
Exit stage right.
Great, not only did you end on time, you ended early.
Little
Look at you go. All right.
You guys like that little star?
Yes, I really am going to bring like chocolates or something next time. Just look out for it in February. All right, so we actually have gotten back on time for our agenda, and it looks like we'll be breaking for lunch and coming back at 12:15 for our next presentation.
And right on cue, lunch was just delivered, so carry on.
Thank you.
It's not.
So go like you did.
All right. Do you pronounce your name Rode or Rody?
Rudy.
All right, Chris Rody. Let's bring our energy back. Come around.
All right, good afternoon. So I'll be talking about priority-based budgeting this afternoon. And I think I was assigned 45 minutes. I think I'll be talking for 15 or 20, but I think that this is a topic that there could be quite a bit of discussion and questions on. So I'll try to leave a bit of time for that as well. I know that several of you are either in your first or second year on this or are new entirely to it. So I'm going to start very broad, state kind of a 1,000-mile or a mile-high view, and we'll get into the weeds at a later point. But I'll answer any questions you have at the end. So first, I want to talk about what PDB is. So something that's kind of the PDB 101, if you will. Good refresher for those of you that have worked with it before, and those of you that haven't, it'll be a good introduction. So there's three main goals for why we implement priority-based budgeting. The first is to try to implement data-driven decision-making so that as we, as a budget team, and you as a council go to craft the overall budget, we can make selections based on very objective criteria. The second one is to provide better transparency and engagement with the community. So we have tools with PBB that we can present our entire budget in ways that really give the public a good foot in the door to see how we spend our money and how that relates to the programs, things they want to see from it. The process also inherently involves the public because we go back to the public every so often and ask for their biggest priorities and what their goals are for the city. So we involve them in the process at that point. And the third objective is that in addition to picking up objective metrics, those metrics are geared towards what the community wants. So as we craft the budget, we can really try to prioritize things that we know are priorities of the community.
Just at the 1,000-mile level.
Sure.
Just contextually, do you know how many municipalities in the state of Arizona practice priority-based budgeting?
I do not. I can look that up for you, though.
I know of one.
Well, the assumed answer is I think there's only a handful at best.
That sounds.
And that's just a context for some of the newer folks up here. This is I'm sure you'll get into the history of it. It's a process we deliberately decided to change just a couple of years ago, right when I was starting. And Chris will do a much better job of recapping all of that. But just for context, when I was at the newly elected officials training with the Arizona League of Cities and Towns in November, December, I'm already forgetting which month that was. We were in a room filled with 300-400 people from cities all over the state, and we were going to start talking about budgeting. And I approached the person who was in charge of that conversation and asked her if she was going to mention priority-based budgeting, and she looked at me like, who are you? Get out of my way. It wasn't worth her time to spend any time talking about it because no one else in the state was doing it. It just wasn't a resource that the league was throwing at the crowd. So we're really avant-garde here. We're really the leaders of the pack when it comes to this type of budgeting. And I encourage you not to take that for granted. I think it's an amazing thing, especially because goal number 3, the point is aligning the budget process. A budget is a values document, right? It expresses what our values are. And to really deliberately align that with community priorities is incredibly forward-thinking. It's really refreshing, and it's very much appreciated by the community, even if they don't realize it.
Okay, can I add to that also in the realm of giving a context? While you don't hear about it in the Arizona League of Cities, but if you were to attend a National League of Cities conference on budgeting, this would be a topic. And we've seen maps depicting what localities have embarked upon priority-based budgeting, and there are quite a few, but there aren't many in Arizona, frankly, and we are a bit of a pioneer in that regard. But elsewhere, it is getting some traction.
Absolutely. So the way priority-based budgeting works, a short summary, is that we take every single thing the city does, whether that's a service we provide, a program that we run for the community, whether it's our own internal supporting functions, everything we do, every minute of staff time, every dollar spent, and assign those to programs. So those can be very specific or they can be very broad. For example, I oversee the Office of Labor Standards. That's a program. We're working with Public Works, plowing streets. That's a program. Just in solid waste, I think we have 6 or 8 programs for commercial collection versus residential collection. And we have the Materials Recovery Center. So all of those individual things we do are programs. So from that, you can assign funds to each of those and say how much money do we spend working in each of those programs. And that's a different way to view it than a line item budget where you can say, oh, this division spent $500 in office supplies. but really what are those office supplies going towards supporting which programs? So that we try to look at it through that lens instead of just a line item lens. Then we take every one of those programs and we evaluate those, give them a score based on how well they align with our priorities and objectives. So those are ones that council and the community came up with a few years ago. I'll explain how that process worked in a second here, but we have our overarching goals and priorities and objectives. I'll try to use the right nomenclature here. And then for each of those things, we evaluate every single program and score it on how well that is. And I'll show you what those are in a minute. But every program will not score well on every priority and objective, but some programs will score really highly on some, but not well on others. And we can use that to determine how we're doing as an overall organization of achieving those priorities and objectives based on how much we're funding each program. And I want to note that priority-based budgeting does not include grants or capital budgets. Those just aren't the ongoing and same type of funds that we use for that. And then I mentioned those priorities and objectives were determined beforehand by community and then ultimately by council as well. So that kind of gives us the broad way to go about it. Here's the history of how we got here. So we started in summer of 2019. That's when we first embarked on our PB journey. By the fall of 2019, we were engaged in the community and council with how you wanted to create the priorities and objectives. That was the first step, is what do you want the city to be doing? So we started those conversations in fall of 2019. Summer of 2020, went to the community and asked them, what do you want the city to be doing? Reconciled all of those that giant map of ideas that came from council and from the community, and adopted seven key priorities and objectives that I'll show you in a second here. That was adopted in November of 2020. Those are still being used today. We want to reevaluate those every so often. So we're thinking that this summer would be a very good time to go back and reevaluate those and see if there's anywhere we missed, anywhere that any new areas we want to focus on, if our priorities and objectives have changed. So you all have a chance later this summer to be involved in that. Yes, Councilor Matt.
How do you do the community outreach? Like,
We're going to be holding forums. People can voice their opinions. We'll open surveys online. People can submit them without having to come in person. We're going to do this. Will be a pretty large scale operation. It'll be multifaceted, and it'll be over the course of probably several months. With the goal of that being that by fall of this year, we can revise or adopt new priorities and objectives, so that next budget year, those will be in place. And for fiscal year 25, I think that'll be. My goodness, we'll be able to use those new priorities and objectives. Here are our current priorities and objectives. There's 7 of them, and I want to call out one specifically here because one of these works different than the other 6. And that's this blue one in the upper right-hand corner, high-performing governance. Every program the city has is either a community program or a governance program. A community program is anything that faces towards the public, anything the public directly interacts with. So a lot of public works things would be community programs. Our swimming programs at the Aquaplex, that's a community program. Anything that we do that communicates with the people of our city and our community is a community program. And then the governance programs are just things that go to supporting our own organization. So that's finance, IT, a lot of things that are under Rick Tatter probably would fall into that guide. So we actually evaluate programs differently depending on which of those they're in. If it's a community program, we don't evaluate it on how well it does for high performing governance because it's a totally different function, and vice versa. We're not going to evaluate how well our IT staff is giving us a livable community because they don't really do that. They support the government organization. So that one kind of actually gets called out separately than the other ones. And within each of these priorities, we have a level of objectives. So I don't know if those are too small for you to read. Can you see those at all? Well,
I can see that there are words.
You can see that there are words. Okay, oh yeah, I'm sorry. We actually have them right here for you. There you go. Thank you, Rick. I forgot about that. So if you care to follow along on the back side of this, I believe, is the same chart here that shows under each one what the different objectives are. And thank you. Sterling, you're great. If you guys want to share one, you're welcome to. And like I said, earlier, just the program might score well on one of these priorities and not others. Same can happen for the individual objectives below them. So if we take a look at, let's take a look at one of these in particular here. Let's take a look at our livable community priority. That's the purple one that's next to the right. That's got 6 objectives underneath it. And it's create a well-being community through partnerships, amenities and activities, regional partners which provide equitable and inclusive educational opportunities, attainable and affordable housing, diverse employment opportunities. Those are all very different things. And one of our programs might work on one of those things, but not necessarily all of them. We just look at how well it does on any one of those metrics. So if, for example, we have one that does a lot to support attainable and affordable housing, but doesn't do a whole lot of else in this, it could still score very well in the livable community because our priorities are multifaceted and our programs just need to hit one of those things to score well. And then under high-performing governance, each of those 6 items are what we evaluate our internal programs for. So high-quality customer service, consistent communication strategies, public trust through transparency and accountability, fiscal stability and responsibility, innovative programs, and then being an employer of choice. So it's obvious that some government programs might be very good, and some of our HR programs might score really well, so Brendan said actually, on being an employer of choice, but they might not score very well on things like fiscal stability or whatnot. You know, those are different objectives, so we weigh them differently. This is where we are right now, and we'll look to amend all of this next year. So it'll be an opportunity for you all to really involve yourselves in the community as well, to refining these and seeing if any whether we look past or that needs to be refined or what have you. Every year we go through a cyclical annual process for this. It starts with reviewing the inventories. So that's just looking at our programs and saying, are these still right? Is this what we're still doing? Is the description of this program match what we actually do? Is there anything we're missing? So every division will go through, every section will go through every year and look at their programs and say, is everything accounted for? Everything that we do accounted for? Is this right? And sometimes programs change. You know, if grant money goes away, sometimes there's a grant funded position that goes away, and obviously we're not doing something anymore, so that program goes away. So we check those every year to make sure that they're still accurate. Then we take the base budget for that fiscal year and assign every dollar in the fiscal in that base budget to one of those programs. So for every non-personnel item, we look at, okay, if it's a $500 line item for, is it office supplies? How much of that money is going towards program A versus program B versus program C? So in public affairs, wherever, we'll be saying, okay, how much of that's going towards office labor standards? How much is going towards our indigenous outreach? How much of it is going towards our videography and all those things? We break it up so that those line items may be in several different programs. Do the same thing with our personnel. So every position for the city, we say, how much of your time do you spend in each of these positions? And that does require a little bit of an estimate, but at the end of the day, it's a real good ballpark look of where we're spending money in the city and what programs we're supporting with non-personnel and with personnel costs. At that point, our system is set and ready to go. If there's any new programs, anything new that came about, I don't think we had any this year. We had, I think, 4 or 5 last year, which usually is pretty short. We then go through and score those new programs to make sure they're still comparable with all the existing ones. We don't go back and rescore them every year because the priorities and objectives didn't change. If the program didn't change, its score should remain the same. For the process we're about to embark on is step 4, where folks from the city are submitting their budget requests for the next fiscal year. They're going to present and defend their requests based on the programs those new funds would go to support. And then the budget team will analyze for those requests and make a recommended budget. And you'll have a chance to have your input at that round. Yeah, Greg.
The vice mayor asked me recently where in this journey we were on a scale of 0 to 10, and I won't tell you my answer to him, but I think we'd all like to hear where you think we are in terms of full implementation of priority-based budgeting.
I would say we're at a 6 or 7.
Well, there you go.
You said seven.
I said 7. Okay, that's good.
So we still have some work to do. We're still working with our vendor on the tool to make it more accessible to some of our requests, to make it more responsive to things we want it to do. But we're getting there. We're getting closer, and hopefully the next year or two that number will be at a 9 or a 10, and we'll be all the way there. It's a journey for sure. Councilman Harris.
How good are we doing in terms of getting this information out to the public?
I think we're doing a pretty good job, and I'm going to show you that here in a second. So if you can hold that
Yeah.
question for now, I'll show you exactly what we're getting out to the public. Side effects. So one of the nice things about PBB is that once we finish our budget and it's complete, we can show the city, the citizens of the city, exactly where we're spending our funds and how well the programs we're spending money on, how well those programs score against the priorities and objectives that they helped us create. So that they've told us what they want us to be doing. We can then show them how well we're responding to that.
Might not like the clear.
Might not like the clear. Let's see if I do it here. No, I'm not. So I'm gonna do that. Okay.
90s called, they have a mouse pad on three.
Just grab a sheet of paper. For this. Make sure this. Once this page loads here, we can show you and get it up into our Teams meeting as well, so our public can see it. Right, we can share a screen of that, right, Steve?
It is sharing.
It is, okay,
Yeah.
well,
Thank you, Steve.
it took a second to load when I tried in the background. But there we go. So if it's okay, I'm going to stand over here so I can run it. I apologize for the awkward angle I'll be standing in here. But this is what our page looks like for the public. At the top of the screen there, you see the different color-coded options. Those are our priorities and objectives. So if you're a member of the public, you can go in and say, well, I really want to see how well they're doing at one of these things. You click on that particular one. By default, it goes to high-performing governance. But if you say, I really want to see how well the city's doing at creating a safe and healthy community, you click on this brown tab right here. It shows you underneath that each of the specific objectives. And below that, you can see how much funds the city spends and how well the programs score in each of these different priorities and objectives. So you can see that of our whole budget, which is I think about $130 million or so, only a small amount of, I think it's 25 or 30 million, goes towards governance programs, and the rest go to our community programs. In those community programs, you can see that our safe and healthy community, a lot of those programs score really highly, the darkest color there. There's 4 quadrants. So a Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4 program, the higher it scores, the better quadrant it gets into. And the darker it shows up here. So over half of the funds that we spend on community-based programs do really well in helping us achieve a safe and healthy community. You can see that taper off all the way down. That doesn't mean that these things aren't being done. It just means that of all the funds that we spend, that's how well they score each of those things. You can do this from different ways. So if you want to see it as a plot here, you can look at our programs specifically and see which programs have the most money and how do they score on this item. Again, this is just looking at that safe and healthy community. You can change that at the top, but every program here is shown the size of it is how much expenditure we put on that item, and the color of it is how well it conforms. So under safe and healthy community, this one scores pretty well. This is our emergency and non-emergency uniform response. So that's a police program, and that makes sense. That would score very highly for a safe community. Some smaller ones over here. This one is commercial recycling collections. That doesn't really do much to keep our community safe, so it doesn't score very well in this particular metric. Doesn't mean it's not a worthwhile program. It doesn't score well elsewhere. But if you're looking at it from a lens of this particular priority, you can see which programs score well and which ones don't. You can also go into other ones. Environmental stewardship. Our transit tax does well in that one. wildfire management program does very well for sustainability. So you can see these ones change based on the lens you want to look at them through. Finally, if you want to really get into it, you can go to a table view. And this pulls up each individual program, shows you the description for what it does. And you can search for a certain program. If there's a certain program you want to look at and see how it scores, this is the place you can do it. So you can see it. The first tab is kind of an overall budget of how well does the overall budget do on each of these priorities and objectives. The second page shows the individual programs. And the third page goes even deeper, so you can search by a program and then see how that does on those metrics. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here.
Magic.
Magic.
Just like that.
Just like that? Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if it was set to the page or not. Yeah.
So, and I think you covered this at first, but now it's just kind of opening my brain. The priority-based budgeting is for the programs, because there's some non-sexy stuff that are essential for running a municipality that isn't going to really necessarily rank in any priority, but it's necessary to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the idea with this is that as we as an organization are making our budget decisions, this is just a lens we can look at things through. When requests come in for more funds, we can say, okay, well, who does this benefit? And how does it benefit our community? Does it benefit this priority, this objective? Is that one that's being well served now versus not being well served now? It's just a tool that allows us to better make decisions. And last year, I'm only my second year in this, so I can only give from my own experience for the previous year. We did have some areas where we had to grant more funds to programs that didn't score very well, because there are things we need to be doing. The cost to host our website went up a little bit last year. That didn't score really, really highly in a lot of these programs. We needed more money for codifying our city code. That's not something that would be a real sexy expenditure, but it's a very necessary thing. So,
Thank you.
So there are things in there that we're not bound to do. If there's two programs and one scores, it's 4 quartiles, so we'll say 1 through 4. One scores a 3.7 and one scores a 3.6. We're not required to give those funds when the score's a little bit higher. We can use that as a decision, or as a tool to make our decision on which one needs it right now. So, kind of when you take a step back, we should be funding more things that come in quartiles 1 and 2, but that's not always the case. There will still be things that we're funding that are quartile 3 and 4 because they're necessary, and because those priorities and objectives are not perfect. It's a tool we use to make our decisions and then to present our data public and justifying those decisions. That's kind of the way it works.
Chris, will you be showing, we have a pie chart that shows how we're doing on the 4 quartiles.
I didn't have that one on here. We do have that pie chart.
Just going off of memory, quartile 1 and 2, which would represent the 2 highest priorities, I think like over 70% of our expenditures.
Like 74, they were really close to 75%.
Yeah, thank you, 75%. Yeah. So room for improvement, but we're doing pretty well.
So, yeah. I think I talked to each of these bullet points in some regard on that last slide there, but different ways you can view the information. There's a lot of, there's different angles you can look at it through. Our quick basic tool shows all of those. It doesn't show line items. So if the person's wanting to say, how much did 001010121, how much money is in that fund? It doesn't really show that because that's available, but that's not really the information that most of the public wants to see. That's not the way they want to interact with the budget. They want to say, I want to see how much you spent on making your community more sustainable, or how much you want to spend on better infrastructure. This is a good way to view that. Takes a step back and makes it easier to digest for a lot of members of our public, as well as us sometimes. Budgets are pretty complex. So, this is my last slide here. Yep. Any other questions or discussion points on priority-based budgeting?
Well, maybe this is more of a prompt for you to elaborate upon, because you're going to have to correct me as I'm talking here, or at least go deeper into it. But I think the point is that this is in contrast to the way that things used to be done. And my understanding is that council members and former mayors were very frustrated with coming on board like this and seeing the budget process the old way. And again, this is the way it's mostly done throughout the state of Arizona, where the various agencies and bureaucracies get together at the appropriate time of year and say, this is how much money we spent last year. We want this much money again. Expenses are good. This is how much more money we want. And it was never couched in that overall arching lens or conversation around what the community's asking for, why we got elected, as opposed to someone else. Those values and priorities, and treating a budget as a moral document, which is really what it is, instead of just a spreadsheet for a gravy train of just provide, doing what we did in the past and not asking questions about, is that working, and are there other ways to redirect these funds or prioritize? So again, there's a lot of time to talk about all this. That was mostly just a prompt. I'm sure someone else can sum it up better. But my point is that we're in a very different process than we used to be. And we should all be very excited and feel very blessed by the work that's been done over the years, and the people involved in that, which include a former deputy city manager, right, Shane Dilley, and I mentioned him just because I'm not sure his name would come up otherwise. There's a lot of other people in the room that deserve a lot of credit for this as well. But it's just, I can't express how much I am excited that we're in a different paradigm in how we do this.
So is the matrix for priority-based budgeting 7 priorities, or did we just have the top 7? I mean, is that kind of is that when we're doing priority-based budgeting, it's like we're going to have these lists of priorities and we'll give it the top 7? Or did the city just pick 7? Like a 7 is set number?
7 is not a set number. No,
Okay.
we could certainly change that. It was just when sitting down and trying to decide what are all the things that we care about as an organization, that our community cares about, if we're doing enough for them. It made sense to make it 7 general priorities, and then sub goals underneath that, or sub objectives underneath that.
And then my follow-up question to that is, then does it matter once we concluded that we had 7 priorities as a city and community? I'm sure that they didn't all rank equally. So does the money distribution, is it ranked in the top priorities, or now it's just, it just has to fit into these 7?
Are you asking if some of those priorities have more weight than other ones?
Yes.
Not really at this point. Those are just the general ones. We score them based on those, but a program that scores a 4 on safe and livable community would not do better or worse in our overall scoring versus a program that scores a 4 on, say, sustainability. They're all kind of taken equally. So it's not like we've added behind the scenes more numbers that weight each one of those. They're all equal.
Well, thank you so much.
I'll note, I remember the council retreat when those 7 priorities were formulated and refined, and it was a long process, and council and staff gave a lot of careful thought to that. But again, it's something that should be revisited from time to time, and we think the upcoming year, the next fiscal year, late next summer to be precise, we'll be embarking upon that again, checking in with the community. Because as we talked about yesterday, the community evolves and the needs of the community evolve, and what we heard a couple of years ago may be largely the same, but there may be some differences.
I just didn't know if there was a matrix already preset.
No. Yeah,
This is how you do a priority-based budget. You're going to come up with 7. And
Yeah.
I think that there's an area you want to be in. You want it to be enough that it's all-encompassing, but not too many that it's still digestible. And if every one of those objectives was its own thing, it would start to lose meaning at a certain point. So
They had different names to begin with too. I
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
going back and forth on
Yeah,
how to label these.
we spent
Yeah.
a lot of time.
So there's probably a range of the number that you want to be in, and I think some falls within that. I don't know exactly what, where too many is or where too few is, but that'll be up for us to determine again as we revisit that process.
Can you speak a little bit to, I guess, the city divisions process when it comes to presenting their programs? Because I've had the opportunity to sit on or be part of the groups that were reviewing these, and there was a lot of back and forth both times among the citizens group reviewing them, where you would see maybe it was a really great sounding program, but there wasn't a whole lot of detail about how does this actually fit this category. Like they might score themselves highly, but there was no detail there. And what I would hope that the community would understand, because it was really a learning curve for us, was how much work goes into putting those presentations together, and what it really takes to, I guess, kind of validate some of those projects across these different priorities, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So just to clarify, are you asking about how the program itself is described and built, or how it's scored against the priorities?
I guess how the divisions go about presenting the information. So like we, from what I'm remembering, being part of the review board or whatever we were, we had the program that, let's just say, it was a fire department program. Literally just saying that because it's the first thing that came to my head. I did not think of anything specific. And it might say, like, this is the program, this is what we're going to do, we're going to increase such and such. And then they had to go through from our understanding, they had to go through and kind of rank themselves on how well they fit these different priorities.
Yeah.
And for some programs, you would have like a whole almost page of information on how it fit different categories. On others, they just kind of scored themselves, and it just really wasn't clear, like, how does this actually fit priority number 4? If you're scoring yourself this highly, like, so I think the question is, like, what that process really looks like from the division side, and ensuring that the people that are reviewing this understand what that process is.
So we embarked on that last couple of years as there have been new programs. Since 2020, we haven't done that a whole lot because the programs have already been existing. I haven't had to go through that process again. But as new programs have been brought forth, and I apologize, I was not here when it was first done, so I can't speak as much to what was done in 2020. It's for gallery to see. I see him working here. If he wants to jump in, he's welcome to it anytime.
Sure.
But yeah.
The initial work that all our divisions put in, start with your programs and costing and so forth. But they had to take every program and rank them against each one of those priorities. And there was a rank from, I don't know if it was 1 to 4, 1 to 5 that we did. So the divisions all had an opportunity to look at their program, look at through a lens of the objectives and how well they advanced those objectives. We then took those to those committees and had a conversation. Do you believe we've ranked these right? What do you think as far as adjustments? Some divisions probably gave a lot of details and others didn't. We recognized that. But we had a peer review committee to verify or adjust how it ranks. So that took a long process. We brought in a lot of people from commissions to be on these teams and have those conversations. And we went through each and every program through every lens and adjusted if necessary. So that was a very lengthy process, but then you get that buy-in that it does really rank where it should be. And it's not just these priorities. We also rank them against basic program attributes, which are, is it mandated? Mandatory by federal, city, state level. Is it growing in opportunities for people to use the service? You know, is it something that is expanding and those kind of things? So it's a really big lens on every program that we look at. Does that help?
Yeah, I want it. I just, it's a really interesting process, and it's really, I think it's a lot more complicated than it gets credited for when it comes to going through that review process, because I mean, you're digging into a lot of different things and weighing them against each other to try and figure out where each of these things rank. And I think it's really something that sort of to bounce off what Vice Mayor was saying, it's not only a impressive thing and an honor for us to be adopting something like this, but it's also really a humbling experience to be part of that citizen review group who's looking at and shaping the future of our city by taking that really close look at these different programs and expressing that on behalf. So I think it's just really an important thing for folks to understand how much goes into that. Thanks.
And when we update the priorities objective this year, we'll go back and rank against those new objectives, right? So we're going to have that opportunity again.
Yeah. On the ranking too, we had a consultant who we've been working with a lot on this. He came in many times, he and his team, to train our employees how to rank. So there was objective training as well.
One thing you mentioned, well, the city's pretty big, both in terms of our budget and individuals that work on just this program. Before this current year we're in right now, and in the fall, I went back and cleaned out our system to make sure that all the users were assigned properly, and then when they left, the organization was gone. And I was thinking that would pare down how many people were in the system working with this quite a bit, but we still ended up having about 110, 115 active users. So yes, different people that have different writing styles or that work in different divisions are going to submit different lengths of descriptions of what they do in different kinds of words. So there is a level of variance there, but we're trying as we go through every year to really take a step in and work with all the divisions and make sure that we get to a level of quasi-consistency across the organization so that programs are written in similar ways and that everyone's kind of trying to accomplish the same thing when they're creating their programs, cost and so on.
So I have a question for the city manager. I think we've established that this is a lot of work.
Yep.
My question is, does it really help you decide the dollar amounts against various categories or programs?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it really informs the discussion. The budget team we were introduced to earlier today, we look at this very carefully. And when the divisions present to us, and Heidi walked us through how that will take many days, right? They're utilizing this tool. So it is a foundation upon which a lot of decisions are made. What I'm reading into your question too is it paying for itself? Is it worth the effort going into it? Time will tell, but I think we would all hopefully agree that conventional budgeting methods may be a little bit outdated, especially in communities like Flagstaff, where our citizens want more transparency. They want more alignment with what where the priorities lie, and that's what this is. So even if it doesn't pay big dividends over time financially, it is making a budget process, which traditionally is not a sexy process. It's not something that catches the public's attention. But this is something where we can really roll out how that alignment does occur and how we're following the community's priorities.
So if you say it's useful, I'll take your word.
I'm saying there's great value to it. Yeah.
All right. Can I go on for one more minute?
No, I need it.
Yeah.
You come back tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. There you go. If there aren't any other questions now, what I'll say is that if you have any later on, please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email. I'm happy to walk through any part of the process you have questions about or to answer any questions you have about the way this works that they want to do outside of this meeting. So
The last thing I'll say is I probably should go try it.
Yeah.
Now, I think I did a couple of years ago, but I should try it again and refresh myself.
certainly play around in that public facing tool. it's good for our community, but it's also good for us internally, the organization, to see things. We do a lot of things, and it's hard to grasp it all at once.
I gave a shout out to Shane earlier. I also wanted to mention Barbara Goodrich in the same breath. She was instrumental in getting this off the ground before Greg got here. So
Yep. A lot of
name
people
dropping
involved.
here.
Yeah, thanks for those props.
And there's more too, if anyone else wants to add some names to the list.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
They drop names, but I don't want to forget anybody.
There's the rest.
I know there was definitely a core team. I think Cyril Langley and Jack Fitchett.
Yeah.
Some others on that main team. Heidi Derryberry's always been front and center on the finance side. Now we have Glorice Thousand, who's also in that core team and developing this year after year. It's a good effort, good team. Thank you. All right. Glad you came back on Saturday to have another conversation. This section is entitled Revenue Update. We're not going to get a lot into projecting and future forecasts during this presentation. You'll see a lot more deep dive on those in 2 weeks, just less than 2 weeks, when we'll be back in front of you. So I'm going to kind of talk about big picture stuff at this retreat and things that our organization's looking at from our revenue side. The first thing is recession considerations. This is always something we want to keep our ear out for, see what's happening in the environment, in the states, and our country, and so forth. Recessions happen. You know, it's a cyclical thing. There's expansion and contraction that happens over time. And generally, a rule of thumb is every 7 years, we tend to see a recession occur. So it's critical to be planning for those futures and making sure you have the resources aligned properly for those times that we may have downturns. Average recession lasts, and I corrected the number here, it's actually 10 months is the average length of a recession. Going back to the Great Recession, that was 18 months. That was a very long one. Going to the COVID recession, that was 2 months. You know, it was a very short, hard recession, but it was short-lived. So it varies in length and time, but you want to make sure you want to weather those storms. And generally, after recession, it takes a while to expand and get back to the same levels that you may want to have in your revenues. So that expansion period, 8 years, again, expand, contract, it's just cyclical, and we know that. So when we're thinking about recessions and we're doing our revenue estimates, we want to make sure we're building in those into our projections. Since our initial Great Recession, we may not have been as good as saying, okay, this is going to have a downturn. Here we're going to have a downturn. And it may have caught us a little bit. And having those large dips in revenues impacted us as an organization, as a community, for sure. So we want to make sure our revenues are aligned and achievable, as well as prepared for downturns. We'll talk about what's in our plans in a couple weeks, but I am preparing for a recession next fiscal year. It tends to be a small one, is what they're saying. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then 7 years out, so the next recession, built-in projections, it's not a guarantee, it could occur earlier, is 26, 27. So we're moderate. We want to make sure that trend line is what we can achieve with resources. So I've been listening to a lot of economists and going to webinars and so forth. I've gone to the University of Arizona Eller College of Management. They do a great economic forecast and webinar. Also been listening to S&P Standards & Poor, which is our rating companies, as well as Fitch Rating. to hear what they're thinking is coming down the pipe. And the Joint Legislative Budget Committee is one that kind of advises the state legislator as far as revenue resources in the Finance Committee, listening to what they're saying, what's coming up. So I'm definitely listening, hearing what's going on, and I'm just trying to pull together some high-level perspectives that has been kind of consistent through these different presentations. They're really, all of them has talked about there's going to be a recession. They really feel there's going to be a recession, but it's going to be mild. It's not going to be the Great Recession. It's not going to be a quick dip like COVID was. So shallow, mild recession, and then coming out, we're going to slow down in our growth coming out of that, the future recession, should we have one. And the positives that they say to why they don't expect it to be so deep or so long is because of where we are in a nation, a state, in local government. Positives are, we have strong balance sheets. There's been a lot of federal funding that helped. We talked about ARPA earlier, helped us strengthen our balance sheets. But we've been a little conservative maybe on projections because coming out of COVID, we weren't sure where we were going. So we've been very cautious in building up our reserves. And this is a trend across the nation. A lot of agencies have strong fund balances. The supply chains are improving. This is one of the things that kind of held back and created inflation and so forth. Supplies were not there, so that creates a little bit of inflation. They're seeing positive movement on supply chains. So that's a value. So even going to recession, if your supply chains improving, that's a positive to help you build out. A strong labor market. It is a very low unemployment rate that we're at right now. So they really feel that the labor market is strong and tight, and in a mild recessionary period, they're not projecting a lot of layoffs because of the fund balance reserves that can help us get through those processes, and because people are looking for jobs, and we'll be able to moderate loss in wages in the labor market going forward. So some of the negative sides and things to watch out for is we are good for one-time monies and spending. You may have these balances reserved and brought up, but you may be more cautious about ongoing new programs, increased costs in your budgets coming up because you want to start preparing. You don't want to start growing too much in your ongoing resources. Interest rates and inflation, they're still moving. The interest rates are expected to probably hit 5.5% in the coming months. And inflation, we hit 7% last year on an average. Those do look like they're coming down, but we'll see. And interest rates is one of those tools that the Treasury will have. If we hit a recession, they probably ease up on that rate climb that we've been going through and possibly reduce them. Projections are in 2 years we'll be back down to maybe 3.5% or 3% as far as interest rates that the federal government is trying to manage. So they've got that in their toolbox. But with interest rates, inflation, the spending power is less. And that's where the negative part is. The consumers don't have the spending power to buy goods and service. It's having an impact on our capital projects, obviously, cost of construction. So, those are those negative things that are weighing down on our economy. Wage growth is another one. Wage growth has been expanding pretty fast across the country. But as far as a municipality and government-wise, we're not as nimble and as fast to move with wages like the rest of the community. So that's a kind of a negative impact to us as a community. And we're going to talk about compensation and employee benefits and so forth here in a little while. So that's one of the things we want to focus on to help us offset those negative impacts to our community, our city, in our outlook. And then less resources for ongoing programs is a consideration. Some things we're also watching as we go through this, indicators that we have out there. consumer spending. They watch this month after month, how much is consumer spending change. They've said there's been about a 1% decline over the last 2 months. So we are seeing that the slowdown has happened. It's started to occur from a spender side. There's activities such as building permit activities that we'll want to look at. Are permits still being built or pulled? People looking to still construct things. With high interest rates, they may be slowing down. One of the things we look at is landfill activity. Is there a lot of commercial activity bringing waste and stuff to the landfill? When it's higher, hey, things are running good. But when it starts to slow down, products are slowing down in sales. Tourism activity, that becomes one of those maybe not a required spending people have. It's a nice to have, and you may have to step back on your tourism, your activity, visitations, and so forth. These are those kind of things that we as an organization kind of look at when we're looking at our economic concerns. This chart I just wanted to put in here just as
that is so you, Rick.
Love it. Look at those numbers. So this is our general fund sales tax, the 1% sales tax that we tax in our community. And this goes back to the 2000s, fiscal year 2000. And it's kind of showing you how revenues get impacted over recessionary periods and other events. So we had a recessionary period. The dot-com era was a recession, the Great Recession, we all recall. And of course, the COVID recession was kind of a shorter area. And this shows how year over year, how our general fund sales tax have compared year over year. You see the volatility that you may see as you get close to the recessionary period. This blue line is our actual revenues as you go through by the millions here. How we see our revenues and how they react during recessionary periods. So this was the big one. Leading into the Great Recession, we actually started to see some declines in revenues. We had great growth before, but then all of a sudden, okay, we're dropping. And this is where it was a multi-year impact. Big impact. Our revenues took a while to come back. It was about 4 years before we got to pre-recession areas. So planning for these, how do you fill that gap in your financial planning is really important. Before COVID, this is where we talked about, we had the conversation of building a recession plan. We're like, oh, wait a minute, look what we're seeing in our sales tax. We actually started seeing a decline, actually before the recession. They started to regrow, they started to come back, and then COVID hit. But this is what we were watching, and we were fiscally planning more conservative when COVID hit, which was a benefit to us. And then we had the recession plan in place also. But here you can see we've had amazing growth the next 2 years after COVID. And, large growth usually means, okay, we're going to see some corrections and slowing down like we did back here and like we did in this range. So that's one of those charts I like to keep an eye on and think about. How do you fill this gap? As we want to keep going this way, how do you fill these gaps in your forecasting? I think that's so over the next couple slides, I'm going to give you kind of an update of where we ended last fiscal year. I'm still working on those projections. I'm watching revenues monthly, but I'm not ready to unveil that here today. I want to give you a picture of what our community was doing in the last year or so. Here you see a 3-year history of our general sales tax, which is also what we talked about on the previous page. This is the 1% we pay transaction pivot tax or sales tax in our community. So in go back over here. Can't stand behind a podium too much. So here you can see, the fiscal year 2020, 1920, you can see we didn't meet our projections. That was the year of COVID. We were actually on pace to beat the budget at that time, but that third quarter of fiscal year 20, it was a major shutdown that we saw. Our fourth quarter revenues, our hotels declined 62% in one quarter for our sales tax revenue. Restaurants, 31%. Personal rental property, 22%. That's your rental vehicles and those types of things. Certain categories got hit very hard. Amusements, almost flatlined, going out to theaters and so forth. But you can see we didn't end too bad compared to budget and projection because we prepared. We saw some declines coming. So in 2021, in the COVID period, we're like, well, let's keep the revenues flat. We just weren't certain at the time. What is COVID really going to mean to next year's revenue? So we budgeted a flat revenue process. But due to influx of funding from the federal government through stimulus packages and so forth, and just the activity in our community, we did some great rebounding in 2020, 2021. The bigger rebounds were in our retail sales tax. Had about a $2.5 million increase year over year. We're talking about these two numbers. Construction, contracting, and use tax had about $1 million in new revenues. Construction contracting just kept going. People kept building just after the COVID recession. And of course, hotels, restaurants, they started to rebound and get there. So over budget, we're about $4 million, but as we update our projections that year, is about $2 million over what we projected. And then coming into the last fiscal year, so this is where we are last fiscal year. We're still a little conservative, maybe on our budgeted revenues, and we beat those projections pretty well. Some of the larger areas of growth in last fiscal year were amusements, 107%. That's the movie theaters getting back, the Orpheum getting back to having events. Hotels had a 30% gain year over year. You could see that tourism came back from all that work. Retail had another significant growth of about 10%, 1.2 million over budget, over prior numbers. So overall, we ended $5 million over budget, but when we came to council last April, we knew revenues were better, and we brought projections in, and we still exceeded those projections that we provided last April by about $2.3 million. So that's a resource now that we have in our fund balance to spend. And this is where we talk about cash balance. That's more of a one-time resource that we'll be looking to allocate with our decisions this year. So sales tax has been doing great. The other one I wanted to talk about was our state shared revenues. These have also been doing very strong. At the state level, we fared very well. This was the pandemic year. Compared to budget, we actually fared very well. Again, we had a great beginning of fiscal year 2020. It just dumped in that last quarter of 2020. So that was good to hear that we met those projections. The next year, being conservative, we kind of wanted to be cautious with COVID and understanding the revenue impacts. But still, they continue to grow. The state revenues continue to grow. Our communities opened up to retail, hotels, restaurants. We got back to business, and revenues continue to increase over budget and over year to year. A little over $3 million in 1 year. And then 2022 just continued to move forward, grow, expand. And as we got to the end of the last fiscal year, we were about $3.5 million over what was budgeted. But again, last April, we came to council, we revised the projections running into year end, and we're just under $1 million over what our April projections were. We're a little bit closer there than sales tax. But again, here's a resource that we have now as a community to invest. I know you're probably wondering about the urban revenue, the income tax conversation at the state. I'll have more information to talk about that at the next retreat, because there is conversation about changing taxes and so forth. We do currently have the latest last year's or year before reduction in income tax built into our models, but now they're talking more, and we'll have that conversation. So I thought it would also be important to bring a snapshot on our BBB funds to you for this this update of where we are and what we see. And this is one that kind of helps you understand the impacts per sessions also, right? Talked about the general fund revenues going up and down, but the BBB fund is one of the harder hit ones during recessionary periods. But those discretionary spendings on hotels and going out to eat, they kind of get pulled back. So here we definitely saw an impact to BBB taxes. I talked a little bit ago about hotels declining 62% in one quarter and restaurants 31%. But this is where our recession plan said, let's put some investments into tourism. Let's invest. Let's get out in the community. Let's promote Flagstaff as a safe place to come to. Thinking about masking up and so forth. And we built those into our tourism models, and I think it really paid off in the long run, and it helped the BBB funds rebound fast. I think it's doing great. This BBB tax helps support tourism, arts and science, beautification, economic development, and recreation. So not only did we get back up to a good projection, last fiscal year, we crushed it in those areas of restaurants, hotels, bars, and so forth. And not only help, these kind of things don't just help BBB taxes. This actually helps our general fund, because it's one of those categories. Restaurants, bars, hotels, motels make up about 20% of the general fund sales tax too. So it's critical that we keep these in sync, and the benefits from here, the investments we make, benefits general fund, it benefits the county, their tax collection, it benefits transportation taxes, because these are also items in transportation taxes. So you can see how understanding this industry is very important for our community. So kudos to the Discover Flagstaff staff. They really went at it. They really wanted to promote us, and they did a great job during this pandemic process. And I thought this would be a great chart to show the impact of the lodging industry. These are metrics that their team reviews. They track them with the hoteliers to see how they're faring in their community. But here's those two recessions that I had on the previous slide. You can see that this industry is one of those where discretionary spending is one of those things that pull back. And so that's why you watch that as a metrics in your economic planning. So you can see it took a while for those to come back over time. And of course, the quick dip for COVID, but look at that rebound. We got back on path and above path as far as our average daily rates. So I'll go through these, guys. The blue line is the occupancy percentage. So you can see less people coming to Flagstaff. It was kind of flat for several years. And we started making some momentum, and then we hit that big dip. Average daily rate is how much they're charging for a hotel room. As they hit the pandemic, and they dropped rates quickly, but they also raised rates coming out of the pandemic to recover the cost. Not having as many people was important. And then revenue per available room is a really good key indicator of how well it's performing. So I just thought that was an interesting chart to talk about impacts to planning looking forward and where we're coming from and where we're hopefully going. Shut up! I made it! Oh, wait, I got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Greg will take it.
Quick comment. Thank you, Rick. As always, very informative. If there's one thing that this graph helps us all visualize, it's that even though the recessions are short-lived, especially in the case of COVID, the impacts could be much more far-reaching in the depth that we can see here. Yeah.
I gotcha.
In this chart illustrates that quite well.
Yeah, these gaps here.
Yes.
It takes a while.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
But this is not what they're looking at, this is what I'm hearing, through the economists. We're not looking at this and we're not looking at this. We're looking more of, okay, getting back up, short.
On your forecasting with our new minimum wage rate, the cost, I hear all the time saying, oh my gosh, I just spent $18 for a sandwich and a bag of chips. People are going to go out, restaurants less, bars less. So are you able to even forecast how that's going to impact? As you showed right there, they just raised the rates, the room rates, and they probably will again because of this minimum wage that we have up here increase. What kind of forecasting are we doing for that?
I'm going to go back to this here because your point's spot on with how we look at categories. When I'm looking at general fund sales tax, I'm not just looking at everything. Oh, everything's going to move 3%. I really think about those kind of considerations and okay, how do we see hotels in a recessionary period versus how we see retail sales and how that impacts those growth projections. They're going to be different percentages over time. So those are kind of things we have a forecasting model to get the variation and give that type of consideration. I think one of the benefits or what have you is, I want to call it a benefit, the higher cost of going out, the higher cost of hotel rooms, that increases our sales tax too, right? While there may be less, if the price is more, it's the same number of people, it's still the same tax revenues to the city. So there's that kind of reflection that inflation helps our sales tax. It's kind of weird to think about it that way, but until consumer spending can't afford it.
And that is
That's
consideration.
the next part.
Because that's the conversation, right?
That's what we're figuring out. Yeah, thanks. All right. Another gold star.
Yes.
How many did you get yesterday?
0.
We go for you.
I only have one slide.
Is it a spreadsheet?
There we go. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council Members Heidi Hansen, and our Deputy City Manager. I was asked to speak about our budget team focus. Basically, this focus is what we share with our extended leadership team so that they have direction on how to put together their budgets. So when they come and see all of us and talk about what they're looking for the year, they know how we want them to consider things. So I thought it best if I just kind of read it to you a little bit because there's a lot. So what we started with is we shared that as we begin the process of building the budget team shared that the goal is to continue to move our organization, and you've heard this before, towards a high-performing government, with a focus on a few key priorities during this year's budget process. Therefore, we decided as a budget team, it made sense to first send out an email, followed by having some meetings with our extended leadership team. So first they get the email, they digest it. Any questions that they might have, we go over that in the meeting with them so they feel like they're ready to go. We also tell them what the key priorities are, so when they're putting together ongoing and what you're going to hear this lingo a lot, ongoing and one-time requests, they know what we're actually looking for. We talked about that some of the focus would be on having successful recruitment, retention, compensation, and infrastructure needs are going to be a priority in budget allocations. We also shared the city will be limited in our ability to fund new initiatives that aren't crucial. So we requested that divisions would thoughtfully consider any urgency in any new requests. So when it came to our priorities, the first one, investing in employees, we shared that, yay, our merit increases that thankfully our city manager saw needed to come back are in the 5-year plan still. So we were able to share that with them, and we're excited that they know that they'll be able to get a merit increase. We also talked that we are going to create a pay-for-performance program so that when they are getting their evaluation, they will get their merit percentage based on that evaluation of their performance. We talked about how we are implementing a minimum wage adjustment based on the consumer price index. We talked about how we will continue to maintain cost share levels for benefit coverage contributions. This is a big one. Our EAC group, Employee Advisory Group, always wants to know how benefits are going to look. We also said that we are going to maintain the general fund 60-day salary sweeps to help fund those benefits and retention efforts. And we also go ahead, Mayor.
What is a salary sweep?
I'm going to let Shannon Anderson tell you exactly what that does so that I don't confuse anyone.
And while she's coming up, Mayor, it's been in place for some time.
Yes.
And continues to work well for us. Go ahead.
Yeah, when you have a vacancy within the general fund, we have varied between a 30-day sweep and a 60-day sweep. It basically becomes one-time dollars that you then can use in the next year budget process. We started doing that to really help us with some of our classification and compensation.
And lastly, we said we were going to continue to hire our vacant and new positions at midpoint of the salary range. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that they knew, and you heard a lot about BBB, or you're learning a lot about BBB, that we want them to remain aligned with the PBB process. So we basically shared that we will be following the key areas. We are going to continue to identify high-scoring programs that need more funding. We're going to identify low-scoring programs that could maybe be reallocated to help fund the high-scoring programs. We want to ensure that the PBB programs that are best aligned with the key priorities have ongoing resources. And this is another big one. We also shared that our focus is transitioning 50% of our current year ongoing operating expenses that have only been able to be funded one time. We're trying to get them to be funded ongoing. So it's crazy. We have ongoing needs that are only being budgeted at one time every year, and we've got to stop that nonsense. So we're dedicated to trying to get to 50% more of that. And then lastly, the funding request focus is again on infrastructure replacement and maintenance needs. So we're talking about our facilities, our fleet. Again, we're looking at the PBB program levels. We were also carefully going to discuss the program change requests. So these are the ongoing one-time requests above their base budgets that they will be asking for. We're going to carefully look at those, including what they might ask for with new personnel and then other non-personnel items. We also shared that requests that fall into, this is again, PBB talk, requests that fall into quadrant 3 and 4, that they may not be considered because we're basically trying to make sure that 1 and 2 are pretty solid. We can't fund everything. Doesn't mean that we won't ever fund anything in 3 and 4 because there's just some services that will have to happen, but we want them to know that we're actually going to continue to look at the PBB very seriously. We also shared that new one-time positions may be considered when the position is needed on a temporary basis. And then we also shared that we will continue to always track budget investments related to the carbon neutrality plan. So, in summary, we said overall budget process is going to be based upon our fiscal responsibility with ongoing constrained resources. And that the best outcome that we could have is if we will all work together to get to what we need as a balanced budget. So that's a lot to digest, right? You're a division director and you have a lot to tackle with your team. And I can tell you my division directors ask a lot of questions all the time. So we try very hard to make sure before they go in and they start creating those budgets, they clearly know what we're looking for so that when they come into the division review meetings, they don't feel like their work was for nothing. And all kidding aside, but I basically think it would be better if we just said, please don't ask us for anything. That's not going to happen. And Greg won't allow it. So, unfortunately, we will go through 3 weeks of division review meetings, and we take each division very seriously, and then we bring you hopefully a balanced budget. And in some cases, we offer you a lot of opportunity to add what you think might be missing. Is there any questions before I turn it over to Randy?
Question. So on the quadrants that we have, how does it differentiate between we've got priorities in environmental stewardship and sustainable infrastructure, which is part of our sustainability carbon neutrality plan, but then you've added to track the request to the carbon neutrality plan. Is that double dipping, if you will, for lack of better terms? I mean, how we've got 2 quadrants that focus on that, because those are community priorities. And now we're also talking about, and then everything else, how does it match with the carbon neutrality? Can you speak a little bit about the difference?
I'm going to let Greg Clifton speak to that.
I think it's a very good question. Both methodologies, I guess, head us in the same direction, which is to do what we can to advance a little bit with respect to our carbon neutrality plan. And we have been looking at this progress. I don't know that I would call it double dipping. I think in one case, you know, the broader priority-based budgeting tool is, of course, something where carbon neutrality and sustainability, I think is the nomenclature used, is one of our key community priorities. And to your earlier question, it's not necessarily attributed any more weight than the other community key priorities. That said, we do try to look at all requests through the lens of sustainability and specifically how it comports or doesn't comport with our carbon neutrality plan. I'll share with you, council members, that we do get requests from the community asking what we're doing financially. How are we moving the needle on carbon neutrality? How much investment are we making? So I think it's an important piece of information. I know the mayor has been, that request was forwarded to the mayor recently. I got copied on an email. So there is interest, not just in what we're doing toward the key community priority as stated, but what we're doing as a whole organizationally for carbon neutrality. One more example to I guess, give some basis to my response here. It was not that long ago when we had a petition come in. I use the word loosely because I don't think it was a formal citizens petition. At least it was not articulated that way, but it was a signed document that came into the council with a large number of signatories on it, asking that everything in the city's budgets be carefully scrutinized from a carbon neutrality standpoint, and that the sustainability division should have a lead role in the organization over all other divisions. So you recall that. I just, these things that come forward to us are, you know, we don't want to be dismissive of them per se, but we certainly want to answer the request by our community as to what we are doing financially, budget-wise, to advance our carbon neutrality. I hope that helps explain.
I just, you know, when you look at, we talked about how we did community outreach and we came up with these 7 quadrants. And so that's what the whole community as a whole, not
Yes.
100 or 5 people or whatever.
Yes.
It's like, how do we determine what our whole community wants? And so we've got those really well thought out quadrants. And then you added, I was just trying to understand, then how do we add, you know, why did we add that if we've already got them very well described in our priorities? So just trying to understand that process. So
Yeah.
thank you.
No, your question's a very good one.
Mayor, Councilmember Matthews, also, prior to putting all the BBB to get priorities together, we actually had the lens of all of us paying more attention to the carbon neutrality plan in our budgets. So that's probably why you're seeing a little bit of that too. There's kind of that overlap. I think as a council body, the best thing to keep in mind is all of it matters. And what we do for the community matters. So if we can balance that out, that's probably the best solution possible. And that's what we're trying to do as a budget team. When all these requests come forward, try to balance it out so that we're doing the best for all of our community. Thanks for your question. Anything else before I let Randy take over? All right. I just want to know where's the sugar today because
Yeah.
I'm needing it.
Thank you, Heidi.
I have gluten-free sugar over here.
You have 15 minutes.
Well, good afternoon. Hope everybody's well.
Oh, wide
Vice
awake.
Mayor,
Working on it.
council members, city manager, and esteemed
Yeah, tell us,
leadership
Joe.
team. My name's Randy Tracy. I'm your new HR and risk management director. So happy to be here. Just past my 60-day mark. So it's been wonderful. It's been a fun few months.
How do you like the weather?
Love it. When you do it big, don't you? A little snow. How about 3 feet? There you go. It's been an adjustment. But, thank you so much for having me today to talk a little bit about compensation, just at a higher level. I just have to say thank you to everybody on my team, Jessica, Brandy, everybody that's helped me. I'm in a learning phase, obviously, in the first 60 days to look at what you're doing, look at your plans, look at your overall comp package and do an assessment on it. So a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about today is really reflecting back on a lot that you've already done and things that are going to be coming up. So I appreciate it very, very much. And I will try to stay in my time frame because I could talk about this stuff all day. This is my life. In our slide, we're going to talk a little bit about minimum wage and the ordinance, the mandatory increases, the merit, which has already been approved and budgeted, market adjustments on our plans, and then also to the budget team, I believe Tuesday is going to hear some of our additional recommendations that will come back at your next retreat. So a lot of the details are still yet to come. So minimum wage ordinance. Where am I pointing? There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. January 1st, 2023, as we all know, our minimum wage went up to $16.80. And anytime that happens, there's going to be a little bit of impact on everything else. So when we talk about mandatory minimum wage, it's just those that were under $16.80 have to go up by law, right? So if you just do that, sometimes it's just a few people that have to be pushed over. You can do that and just stop there, but you create compression. So this person now gets a little bit more and his supervisor's now only making 3 cents more than they're making. So it creates some compression. In this particular case, because the increase was not so significant, the compression and the ripple effect didn't go up very far, only to about maybe 5 ranges out of all of our ranges. So the leadership team, looking at that, making sure that we continue to have a good, healthy compensation plan, went ahead and allowed us to go ahead and move some of that compression up to those top, I think it's 4 to 5 ranges is all. So that begins to push those spreads back to where they're supposed to be. So if you want a 2 to 3% spread between maybe a lifeguard and a lifeguard supervisor, then you've got to keep that compression going up, just as an example. So we did that, but it only went up to where we have the initial impacts. As you can see, your ordinance beginning in January 23 and each year thereafter, the minimum wage must increase by the consumer index, price index, and be at least $2 higher than the Arizona state minimum wage. So if we look at the current trajectory of CPI, now it's all over the board and there's so many factors, but if it just stays on the current trajectory, which is a slight decrease every time, your next minimum wage could be around $18 an hour. That's what we're looking at, okay? So, and there could be so many things could impact that, right? CPI could take a nosedive. A lot of things could happen, but just looking at the current trajectory, that's a possibility, right? Minimum wage CPI impacts, obviously it goes from 0R4 to 25R. That was that initial wave that we had to kind of fix. Those are the lower level ranges. Now we do have a couple of ranges that we're talking about collapsing because there's so few positions in those ranges anymore that we're going to do some maintenance on those programs, hopefully coming up soon. The temporary pay plan is also impacted by the CPI because it's tied to a regular pay plan. All right, so if you're in 04R, there's a 04T. And if 04R gets impacted, so does 04T, which is our temp plan. So these impacts are felt across your entire compensation plan. We're also evaluating timing. Last year, correct, City Manager Clifton, that you guys did an early implementation.
Correct.
Went ahead and put it in July as opposed to waiting until January. Sure, that's going to be a discussion as well in the weeks to come as to whether or not that's going to be a good strategy. Because as you all know, and it's not just here, where I came from, everybody's suffering the recruiting problems, retention issues, the trends that are happening in the workforce, rage applying, quiet quitting. These are all new terms that we're experiencing in every government entity, not just in Flagstaff. So I don't want you to feel like you're the only ones having to face this. This is a nationwide problem that we're all having to combat as well. So I know there's going to be a lot of discussions about how we face those things and come up with viable solutions. The merit, which was budgeted and approved. Again, City Manager, I believe that was on a 5-year plan.
Yes.
Pre-budgeted. Okay. What year are we in, do you recall?
Our second, it's a rolling 7 months.
Okay.
7 years. It's a rolling where we have built in.
Okay. Which is great. It keeps you healthy. It keeps you being competitive, and you have to have that. There was a time prior to the pandemic that one and done, a 2% COLA, and everybody's happy, right? No, that don't work anymore. I tell you what, I saw both where I came from and where I'm here now, is that employees, because of the inflation, are individually becoming their own advocates to drive wages higher. When we do an offer, first thing they do is counter offer $15,000 higher. Even if they can't get it, they're trying to drive those wages. So wage has been driving higher and higher across the nation. We face the same thing. How do we provide a reasonable, fair offer and still meet the needs of the candidate? So those are always struggles. So by doing this merit increase, this consistent merit increase, it really helps us stay a lot more competitive than sometimes even our comparators that only do it once a year. So it goes to 3% to the regular pay plans. The step plans, fire, police, water services, they have a little bit different way that we have to do it on their steps, so they're not impacted directly by that merit. It's a different kind of increase. And feel free if you have questions. Stop. I'm sure somebody in the room can answer a question.
I got a question. When you use the word merit, everybody gets it, right?
No. So a merit increase is a little different than COLA. COLA, everybody gets it because of cost of living. In this particular case, the way it's being applied here, sir, is that if you don't meet standards, if you get a bad evaluation rating, then you would not get that. If you meet standards or higher, then you would get the 3%.
So most employees get it.
For sure, for sure.
Indeed.
In most agencies, the truth is less than 5% of the employee count is less than stellar. In most cases, if I did the math here, I haven't yet. It's probably even less than that. Okay. Pay for performance. So because that's a great point. You got a great segue into my next slide.
What's confusing is the company I work with use these terms very differently.
Yeah, different from place to place, for sure. But in this particular case, it's distinguished from a COLA by COLA. Everybody gets it. Good producers, bad ones. Here, if you're not meeting standards, you wouldn't receive that. Anybody else would get it. And now, this coming year, we're working towards a July 1st implementation of doing a true pay for performance, right? So going now from a merit transitioning and migrating to a pay for performance, based on the rating you receive in your evaluation, will determine the percentage that you will receive within a specific range, maybe 2 to 4%. We budgeted for, you know, if you get a 2, if you get a 3, if you get a 4, and so on. So we're working towards that right now. This all started before I got here, and they're doing a great job of moving in that direction. We're collaborating with a consultant to try to provide some professional training, because pay for performance is a different mentality. I've done this twice at 2 agencies, and it takes a lot of training with both staff to understand why you get what you get, and also supervisors as to how to measure things accurately and fairly. And so hopefully those consultants can really bring substantive training to our teams. STEP plans are not impacted by this. As I stated earlier, the way those steps change is a little different than everybody else. I also want to distinguish market adjustments mid-year and annual. Okay, everything's a market adjustment, actually. It's all the same beast. But in order to keep people clear, mid-year market adjustments are different than annual market adjustments. Okay, so mid-year market adjustments, this team, I believe last year, committed that HR would look at 25% of our classifications each year, going through all of our classifications over the course of a 4-year period. Right? So this is a much deeper study than just a benchmarking type study. The team also set aside $143,000 to help with those adjustments. So for example, we pick 25% of all of our classifications, so 200 some odd, and those are picked based on, have you had a hard time recruiting? Those types of things. It's not just random. We pick those that have some challenges ahead of time, and you should try to do those first. And let's just say we picked operators, right? And we look at them and we go to the market and we look at their salaries and go, wow, they're 4% behind already. And we just made a change. So rather than just leave them there, because what does that cause? Now the folks that are trying to recruit operators can't get any operators because it's already lagging in the market. That $143,000 is very valuable because now we can make the adjustments on just that position. As we look at them, we can get them up to where they need to be. So it's a holistic approach, right? It's what you're doing and will be doing. Plus, it's what HR has been empowered to do throughout the year to make sure that we're staying up with the market and being competitive. Yes, ma'am.
Randy, when you talked about, how it compares to the market, obviously Flagstaff is about 13, 14% higher cost of living. We have our own living wage rate for Coconino County. So are we comparing our salary scales against a living wage for Coconino County, or just what the industry for those job positions yield?
Fantastic question. That's something that I look at consistently. So there's 2 ways we look at it. And then I've actually started talking to my team about looking at. There's about 26 comparators they've been using. That's what I've found. These are local, valley, everywhere, right? And we look at those and we see where we fall within that frame. Now, every agency, whether formally or informally, chooses where on that list you're going to be. It appears, based on the research I've done, we've landed at the 50 percentile mark, meaning we try to fall somewhere in the middle. We're not competing with, Phoenix, City of Phoenix, who seems to have a pot of money. I don't know where it comes from. But, and then you wind up with the state of Arizona, which is typically lags every one of those charts. We trying to find the middle. Second thing, after you look at that, I've asked the team to start looking at our true comparators. All right. And this is the way I choose a true comparator. Can I keep my house here and drive there? That's who I'm really competing with. Prescott Valley, NAU, people like that, right? And so we have both of these charts. We see where we fall in this one, and then we see where we fall in the folks where we're really losing, right? And then we want to also, this one size fit all doesn't work, right? So there are some positions in the city. I got 5 minutes. One position in the city, sometimes it may go a year without it. We can't do 50 percentile on that position. We're never going to fill it. So sometimes we need to be flexible enough, which we've been doing, is working with police and fire and other places to say, this position needs to be at the 75 percentile because we're never going to recruit at the 50 percentile. So we have to have that flexibility to adjust those a little bit so that we can be competitive. And we're starting to do that now. I don't think we'll ever be number one. There's some agencies out there. I honestly don't know where they're getting the money from.
Randy, can I offer a very quick comment on
Yes,
mid-year adjustments and the value of those? As we did the entire organization compensation study years ago, by the time that study was concluded, and it took a year and a half, 2 years for it to be conducted, and then the numbers were put into place and a lot of process, arguably we were a bit outdated by the time it was implemented. There's just that much lag time these days with things changing as fast as they are. This mid-year adjustment, even if it's just at 25%, probably is going to help us stay more competitive than doing everything every few years. And I'm not saying we won't do that, but I just want to give importance to this mid-year adjustment. Thanks.
No, I agree, sir. Absolutely. In this market, the way that it's moving, it's a treadmill. It's not a static point. It's like hitting a moving target. By the time we put in a raise, all of our comparators, the people that are selling our people, are putting in raises too. And so he's exactly correct, is that if we have to do it holistically, right? We do things on an annual basis. We do things throughout the year. And then we also target things as they become hard to fill and so on. By doing all of these things and being powered to do that and also having the funding to do it, that keeps us in a very competitive place throughout the entire year. Okay? And I'm down to 1 minute.
Can I add something really quick? And so to the benchmark data that Randy's talking about, we actually purchased what's called a cost of living index. And so that'll take what's happening here in Coconino County and compare it to what's happening in Maricopa County to make sure that it's evening out so the dollars that you're looking at are the same. Answer your questions.
So our compensation and being able to recruit and retain great, amazing people for the city of Flagstaff is what I'm committed to do. It takes intentionalness on focusing on. Did I put something wrong?
It's a ghost. It's a ghost.
You thought that was part of my presentation. You're like, wow, that's a complex comp system. Not that complex. But it does take resources. And the thing I have found over the last 26 years doing this stuff is it takes intentionalness. We have to intentionally stay on top of it, constantly looking at our comparators, constantly talking to the division directors and the city manager's office saying, where are we having problems at? Let's not wait 8 months. Let's wait tomorrow. We're going to get started on it. And so just being very mindful about being intentional about that and keeping that whole program being competitive is going to be what we do to meet those goals and objectives. So Any questions? I know I'm out of time, we're probably 30 seconds over.
No, you're within your last minute.
Wow, all right.
Can I just make a comment though? Years ago, and I don't know if it still happens, Greg, you can tell me if not, when I was on the school board, the Alliance. And what we would do is if NAU had a position and if they hired that person and they had a spouse or a partner, that name or resume or whatever would go into a pot. And then we could look at those folks. The same would be with the city. If they were hiring somebody and that person had a spouse or a partner, then their name and resume would go in. And then that would help all of us. Because if you can find, 2 people a job, then it makes it a little bit better if that person wants to work. Some people, are going to choose some other kinds of things. But do we still do that? Do we even have those conversations? And are they really true conversations, or do we just say we're going to do it, but really we don't do it?
It's a little bit less formal. So I would say probably back in the mid 2000s, we had an HR piece of that alliance, and the HR professionals of those agencies would get together and talk. Most of that has gone electronic, and so what happens now is, for instance, recently at CCC, one of their employees had a trailing spouse who had a background in public works, and so they sent it out to all of us to say, here's a trailing spouse, here's his background, here's his resume, and we were able then to communicate as to what processes we have going and where that person will want to look and what positions are they called. So yes, we still have it, but it's a lot more informal than what it used to be as far as those monthly alliance meetings for the HR professionals.
And I know there's probably a whole bunch of legal stuff and all of that with it. Sterling, I'm sure you can jump in here, but I don't know. It just seems like, we could all do ourselves a little bit of a favor if we try to help a little bit more, other than saying, go fill out an application. So
It's an excellent idea.
yeah. Anyway,
The referral program, maybe something that we're transitioning to.
Absolutely.
So we're currently looking at a formalized referral program where people are actually rewarded for referring folks that come here and stay for a year. So I've heard of those programs in the past, but a lot of those which are being transferred into these type of formalized programs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Randy.
Well done.
Right, we do have a 15-minute break. It's a few minutes after, and I want to make sure everyone has the right amount of break time. So is it okay if we start at 2:20 when we come back? That'd be okay. Then we have the council expectations with Greg. Big picture goals.
10 minutes.
Does that work?
Free
So we have a full 15-minute break for everyone to take care of their needs.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be back then at 2:20. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're live.
Okay, thank you for being so timely, and I hope everyone had a great break with some coffee and some sweets, and did what is it called, a fika? Fika, that's right. Did a great fika. And so now we have our city manager, Mr. Clifton, here to give us a few more pieces of information about council expectations. And let's give him a round of applause for being an amazing city manager.
Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. In previous retreats, but first I want to back up and just say this whole process has really, I think, evolved in such a positive way. A few years ago, we were hearing from council during very similar retreats, not a lot of expressed frustration, but good suggestions. One, they wanted more of an overview of the budget process. They wanted the roadmap, timetable, what is to be expected. And it goes a lot to Heidi's presentation this morning and Brandy's and then Rick's. Starting out very high level, the large end of the funnel. And then as time marches on, we will get more and more specific I think it not only works well for council, but it works well for us, frankly, to be thinking in that way. Other suggestions that were made was, of course, early on, we need to understand priority-based budgeting better. It is a hard concept to grasp until you've been in it for a while, and then it starts making sense. I don't mind sharing with you that for the first year or so with priority-based budgeting, my eyes were glazed over. I had no idea what this was about. But I did know that people were excited about it, and it was going to be a journey, and it has been. And now, fast forward 2 or 3 years later, it's making sense. There's a lot of clarity that's coming into focus, and I'm so grateful to see that. And Chris, thank you for your presentation earlier. Today's presentation was a nice segue from yesterday's presentation. We talked a little bit about big picture stuff yesterday, why we are the size we are, and why the divisions, and what's the role of council, what's the role of staff, how do we work together in the same sandbox. Very important stuff, and thank you for giving us your audience yesterday, and then today bringing that into the budget arena. Same comment, it's been very beneficial. I enjoy particularly sitting on the side and watching the presenters and listening to these topics. I really do. I take great satisfaction in that. For reasons already stated, one is just wonderful to see the expertise in the room on display. Secondly, we have an engaged council asking very good questions, and there's good dialogue. And that, going back to yesterday morning's introduction, that is the essence of these retreats, is to dialogue. That's what brings us to this council discussion. In years past, council suggested, we would like a little more time to chat at the end of these retreats, maybe, and share some ideas. We think that's a very good idea in and of itself. To hear your ideas, we will offer up some big picture goals. You've already heard some snippets on those from Rick and from Heidi Hansen. I have to be careful here. We have 2 Heidis in the room. What lies ahead? And then more recently, Randy talking about compensation and investing in our employees remains a huge topic. Not because we haven't made ground. We've made tremendous ground. The council last year was incredible in terms of meeting some needs for our employee compensation. Very good outcomes that were quite favorable to our organization. But we're not there yet. It remains a challenge for us. Recruitment remains a challenge. Retention remains a challenge. Staying competitive in this uber competitive environment that we are in. So we would invite you now to take your thoughts and express them in words for us. We want to hear what you have to say.
I was going to do interpretive dance.
Yeah, the mayor's going to do interpretive dance. For the record, the mayor will do it. Mayor, you just backed me up. To set the stage, we'll offer up what we feel might be some talking points, some things, and I think we'll also talk about what's lying ahead. Not tomorrow, Rick Tatter, but in 2 weeks. There you are, my brother, Rick Tatter. So let's do this. Let's open up some discussion. What are priorities that you've been hearing from the staff? And then now we will want to hear from you. You have heard from us clearly the need for continued investment in our employees, compensation, investment. We have some challenges, and you had a good high-level overview of that today. Something new that I would enter into the discussion, but something that you'll be hearing more about with our facilities team, and there is a team for facilities. Scott Overton, thank you very much. We've been talking a lot about security. We've had some occurrences of late, nothing to be alarmed about. But I think the bigger discussion is, are things changing for us in local government, and should we be resilient to those changes? Are there increased risks with what we do? And do our facilities where we reside and do our work and conduct our business, are they safe enough because of perhaps some increased risks? Or, maybe better phrase, just being proactive, taking measures now to avoid situations. Facility security. Maintaining existing infrastructure and equipment somewhat in the same realm. Are we doing enough to maintain our buildings? We're enjoying this facility here because there's been an investment in the audio, visual, and technology. Thank you, CJ, and your team for this. Eventually, a lot of our conference rooms will have this ability, aquaplexes on deck, and things like that. The council chambers, we've made great strides in improving our infrastructure there. But that's just one thing. I mean, we can talk about technology and computer and audio capabilities, streaming capabilities, but you can broaden that discussion to all equipment. Does the fire department have enough ladder trucks? We've invested in quints of late. That's been great. But where are we equipment-wise? Public Works. As we've been watching all the snowplows and graders entering and exiting the facility here, how are we doing with that equipment? Are we keeping up with events like what we're having this week? I think you can put an exclamation point on this when you start talking about things like stormwater. A topic you will be hearing a lot about, and one that has been discussed, especially with respect to the November ballot measures that were approved with a fairly wide margin, 76% on Proposition 441. Don't quote me on that number. That segues into the last bullet point here, and one that I have been wanting to really get out on the table, and I've mentioned it to many of you in one-on-one discussions, and this is not a Greg Clifton thing, this is an organizational thing, it's a community thing that we need to be, we need to get our heads around it, we need to be prepared for it, and we need to have a good plan for success going forward, and that is our capital projects. $250 million of secured projects await us with timelines, and that those timelines are now. Shovels will be in the ground soon on some of these projects, and very soon when you think about the term that you're now entering, this council, the newly seated and the incumbent council, this council will be seeing a lot of this stuff implemented. Might not see it to closure because some of these projects span years and years, but it's going to be a busy time in terms of capital investment in our downtown, our Rio de Flag stormwater project, downtown mile. I don't know where last mile comes from. I keep saying that. The downtown mile project, which is integrated with the Rio de Flag project, the Beulah roundabout, the Cedar Avenue roundabout, the Spruce Wash improvements, discussions of that happening right now. That will involve drainage improvements, new culverts underneath Linda Vista and Cedar Avenue, and a long list of other flood mitigation efforts that are all desperately needed. The wastewater plant, we keep hitting on that one, but that's, arguably the elephant in the room when you think about bigness and scope and cost. That one's huge and is out there. This council will be wrestling with that quite a bit. The good news is we with the passage of 441 and some improvements that are happening now, we're buying a little bit of time capacity-wise with our wastewater treatment, but it's a bit of a placeholder. The big fix lies ahead. John Wesley Powell, we're having great discussions of that on your 5-year plan. We start seeing expenditures of this in 2025. We actually think that that's going to move up because we have some interesting partnerships coming to the table. The previous council heard from many of those partners, potential partners, the neighbors, the property owners out there, as to things like the alignment of John Wesley Powell and the possibilities of what could happen. And we are meeting on that. Our most recent meeting was earlier this week. So stay tuned on that. And that's just a sampling. That is not an exhaustive list. It's just a sampling of what lies ahead. Wastewater, stormwater, transportation. They top the list, and it's going to be a busy time. And if you were to ask me, okay, from your vantage point, city manager, what are the big picture priorities as we are looking at this next year's budget and beyond? This would be my first response: is capital projects, infrastructure improvements, orange cones, detour signs, and a lot of construction will be upon our community. And all of it is very good, the outcomes of which are desperately needed. But getting there is going to be, quite a journey for all of us, and especially for our elected body, because we all know how people love construction. And when, gosh, I mean, I'll say something here that will probably be a little bit concerning, I guess, to hear, but think of construction and then think of a storm event like what we had this week. And how does all that look? Last year we had a flood event in the neighborhood that was also experiencing a significant construction project. And it didn't go that great for us. I think we weathered it quite well and did what we could. But when you add construction to the equation of all of these things like natural disasters and big storms, it just adds to the complexity, right? So enough said on that. It is a big picture priority that we identified along with these other ones. And then this, and I'm going to invite my twin brother to come on up and chat with you a little bit about what lies ahead, because some of the things you're thinking about in terms of big picture projects may already be in the queue. And we wanted to at least let you know what will be discussed in a couple of weeks before we turn it back to you inward to hear what your big picture priorities might be.
I'm not sure if I keep the glasses off and talk like you do, so I'm gonna
do this
like this.
Yes. Go ahead.
So just to frame, us coming back in less than 2 weeks and not on a weekend. Here's some draft ideas that the budget team has put together, somewhat very similar to what we've done in the past few years. We'll start off with revenue projections, updates, give you the forecast, and outline the resources that we have available. A lot of it's focused on general fund, but we'll have you that picture of what we can do in the coming year. Available resource, what the fixed costs are, the pensions and utilities and those kind of things. We'll have a deeper conversation on investing employees. What does it cost to do these measures that Randy spoke to earlier today? What's it cost to move the needle on these types of concepts? We'll give you an update on the bond projects, the 2022 bond projects that were approved. We'll give you a federal funding update. There's been a lot of monies that the city is reaching for. There's a lot's been applied and received, and we got future requests that we're going to put together. So we'll have that conversation, and then the resource needs and priorities. That's really the hard conversation about where do you put these resources you have, maintaining facilities, equipment, and so forth. I found out we're not going to talk CIP too much at that meeting, but the operating capital, the maintenance costs that we have, we'll have those types of conversation. But this is where we want to now turn it to you as council. In 2 weeks, are there more topics, more conversations that you want us to bring to the forefront for this February retreat so we can start preparing for that conversation? So now, time to pass it over.
So let's chat.
Share with us your thoughts, and it's all good ideas. Yes, Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, I'll start this off. I'm going to talk about investing in employees. When I was in industry, I was a manager, and I figured I had a very simple job. I hired the best people, and I kept them happy. And that's my basic philosophy on employees. Hire the best, you keep them happy. So the second point is the water treatment plant. Just real briefly, I think it was 6 months or so ago that most of this council went down to Scottsdale and we toured their water treatment plant. And we saw that they treated their water, their reclaimed water, way beyond what we do. And they would not put the reclaimed water that we do, the so-called A+, into their aquifer. So the only reason I bring all that up is to say that at some point, we're going to have to improve the quality of our reclaimed water beyond A+. It needs to be to the point of being potable. And I know that's a big deal. And I know we're not going to do it in the next 3 months. But anyway, that's on my mental list of things that need to be not forgotten.
Excellent, great. Are you taking notes, by the way?
I am.
Okay, thank you.
I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
No, thank you, actually. Exactly what we're looking for here, kind of the big picture.
Yeah, and I didn't mention a lot of the other things that are going on, like flood control, rear the flag. Obviously, I support that stuff. So it's so obvious I don't even bring it up.
Thanks. We'll go Councilmember Harris and then Councilmember Sweet.
So big things for me, and I don't really see it specifically on your list. What is community involvement? Before, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, whenever it was, I started getting involved in city stuff and coming to city council. But what I realized is that a lot of people don't. They don't think that, anybody's going to listen to them. They don't come to city council. They don't. So what I'm thinking about is how can I help the city do a better job of being that kind of contact? And so what I'm thinking I'm going to try to do is go to where people are. So that means, school board meetings, PTOs, school events where parents and kids and stuff are. And a lot of times, people will talk to you while you're there and you can get information in here. And then maybe by establishing some of those relationships, people will want to come out more and voice their opinion. And I'm not trying to get to the point where, everybody's yelling and screaming at you. That's not the point of this. It's about getting people involved in their community so that if and when we go out for things, then at least people have a better understanding. Because I can bet you that all the stuff that we're talking about today, they don't have any idea about what priority-based, budgets are about. And maybe some of them won't really understand the whole process, but at least is there some way we can start to talk to people about that so that they have a better understanding of what we're trying to do? So those are the things that I think about. I get all what we're talking about today. I get it, not an issue for me, but I can tell you that the people that come to the Southside board meeting or that are at school PTOs, they have no clue. And so that's why I think people are so easy to criticize. Well, the city doesn't do this, the city this, and the city that, because they don't know, and nobody's taking the time to really know them. And then the next thing I will talk about is let's not depend so heavily on technology, because a lot of folks are not as tied into technology as some people seem to think. And that's the population who's been left out of the conversation. And so I'm just really very aware of that. So I would like for us to think about how we get stuff out. And I know, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, boots on the ground. Boots on the ground, you cannot be more effective than that. And somebody's got to do it. And so that's why I say that we've got a whole bunch of nonprofits that have resources that they could use to help us do that boots on the ground. But we've got to figure out how to partner with them so that they can help us do the job that we need to get done. So that's my 2 cents.
And a good 2 cents it is, and perhaps those two
come together, the need to engage our community as a whole and the need to engage those who don't have all the technology conveniences at their fingertips. So very well stated. Thank you. Councilmember Street.
So everything was on my list, however, the security aspect wasn't. So I'm surprised to see that on there, but glad that we're talking about it. I did the ride along with Lyle and for the snowplow. We were talking about his job. He's been with the city for a while and loves his job. The one thing he said that might drive him out, the cost benefits. And I just wanted to bring that up. He's not making enough to pay for the health insurance. So it's something that I resonated with me. I would hate to lose employees for that reason. And for me, the wastewater plant is top of mind for sure. And I think we need to have a solid plan for that.
Okay, on the first topic, thank you so much for raising that. It's coming your way. The EAC has been spending a lot of time talking about benefits. Of course, of no surprise, there will be an increase in insurance coverage, health costs. The approach in the past has been, does the city pick up that increase or is it shared proportionately? There'll be recommendations coming to you. So that's a very much an alive discussion right now. So thanks for raising it. Yeah, great. Councilmember.
So investing in employees is a big one for me because it ties into our affordable housing. It's not just the unhoused and low income residents we have here, but our middle income residents, because of the cost of housing, if we can elevate, I feel like we need to be a leading example of at least paying that living wage. And it's hard to hear that we have workers that may have to move out because between, healthcare costs and then, what their rents are because they don't make enough for that. We're never going to be an inexpensive place to live, so I think we need to be real sensitive to that. And then, kind of piggybacking on what Councilmember Harris said, public participation has been on my radar a lot too. And I know that we've made great strides in that with our social media, video that we're doing and all those different avenues. Because when I look at these surveys that have came in front of council and other avenues, and it's like 300 people, responded to the survey. Well, we have 80,000 people here, 80 plus, whatever it is. And so is that a real good representation when we're making decisions? Well, the community wants this. Well, 150? Or, can we do a better community participation outreach so we really know what the community wants? Because that, being a new council member, I struggle with, how will I know? Is this something I personally am passionate about, or is it because I'm working for the community, not putting my interests forward? So I would feel more comfortable when we're making decisions to know, a bigger slice of the community has said this is what we want, and making sure that's just a reconciliation with myself to make sure it's not something I just want to put forward. And then last but definitely not least as equal is the capital improvement timelines, like JW Powell. I watched the council meeting where folks from 4th Street, had decided they didn't want the road, extension road going through there, so we changed it. And it's like, well, yeah, because it took 20 years to get to this point, and so understanding why, and I know federal funding, and when we do bonds, it's only a percentage of the whole project, and just having a better understanding and maybe talking about ways to streamline that. So when we make a decision and the voters vote for something, it doesn't totally look different by the time we're ready to implement it. And then we have unhappy, community members because it's like, well, that was 20 years ago, life is totally different from now. So, and I don't know if that's just the nature of the beast when you're doing bond projects or capital improvement projects, but, that we have so much with infrastructure needs, waste, stormwater drainage and stuff, and the wastewater plants and stuff that I'd like to have a better understanding and maybe talk about how to streamline that faster so we can be more reactive. That's
Good comments. Councilmember House.
Thanks. So I know you and I talked just the other day and you asked me to kind of hold on some of this. But certainly for me, housing is one of the big ones. And I believe we're going to have some conversations about different things that are coming down the pipe. But I really think that, you know, it ties into so many of the things that we're talking about. Particularly, I think yesterday it was mentioned that we're having to look at expanding where we get those for commissions and different employment opportunities because they can't afford to live within our cities. And that certainly contributes to recruitment efforts as well. If folks can't find a place to live, they're able to take the jobs that they're seeking here in Flagstaff. So just, you know, finding ways to really get innovative on workforce housing, looking at how to streamline some of the processes and the development of a diversified range of housing types and all of those sorts of things. And really looking at how we can expand access to housing types in all of our neighborhoods and communities. So that we're reaching just across the spectrum of what that need is. Also for me, I think a big one is just community engagement and investment. It's been talked about already, but really just finding ways to connect with people where they are and finding ways to just meet them in the ways that they need so that we're actually meeting the needs of those specific neighborhoods or specific communities and demographics. I just saw, and I'm not really remembering where this was, I think it was on Facebook, a conversation just recently, but again, the conversation of not being able to engage with council because of the time of our meetings. And so I'm not suggesting that we change that time, but it does suggest to me that there may be opportunities for us to find other ways to not expect the community to come to us, but for us to go to the community and show them, we want to hear from you, we want to meet you where you're at, we want to engage with you so that we're actually meeting the needs that are the true priorities of that community.
Thank you for that. You know, on the meeting topic, and let me mention, I see Sarah Gar online, and Sarah, if you can be prepared to come in and chat about when you'll be presenting on the housing topic in front of council. I know that's in the queue and that could be helpful. On the topic of time of meeting, now that's a council decision and one that can be revisited. But I do want to share with you that we deliberately try to not put very weighty topics on the agenda between 3 and 5 o'clock. You're going to have a lot of informational sharing and city managers reports and work anniversaries and good stuff, of course. But if it's a weighty topic that we think, you know, will garner the interest of a large part of our community, we try to slate that for later in the meeting. That said, we're at your pleasure on this. If council wants to switch up the time of meeting, I suggest we give it a lot of thought and be very outward with our messaging so people know, because it was a bit of a change last time and we don't want to be in the routine of changing very often, but it is your call and we're at your pleasure. Sarah Dar, are you with us? And if so, can you jump on?
And before she does, just to be clear, I am not suggesting that we change the time of the meeting.
That's what I heard.
I'm just talking about expanding how we reach out to the community and give them more opportunities to engage with us rather than having to make it.
As long as I'm in jammies by 8.
I don't know that we have Sarah, but Stacy Salzberg, we have housing queued up to present to council.
We do. I think we are going to hear from them, I believe as early as February 14th.
That's the date.
Provide an overview of the program and their 10-year plan.
Yeah. So coming your way, council member, and I think many of the questions you asked hopefully will be encapsulated in that presentation. It'll be very important. Coming your way on February 14th.
Well, we also, I'm sorry, One more thing related
Yes,
to
please.
that, I apologize, Councilmember McCarthy. I remember with the past year's budget, there was the conversation about, it was funding that was allocated to the examination of I think it was maybe the zoning code in relation or a partnership between housing and maybe sustainability. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
And is that something that's going to circle back for that?
Yeah, we will circle back on that, refining the code to better accommodate housing and sustainability objectives. Yeah, we will follow up on that and weave that into the discussion coming your way. Yes.
Oh, he left it.
So just a real quick point. You mentioned that we put the items that the public may have more interested in later in the meeting.
We try to.
That's good. But then what we also could do is say, this item will not be discussed before 6 o'clock or whatever. Because usually that wouldn't be a problem at all for us. But it would let the public know that meeting starts at 3 o'clock. But this isn't going to come up till 6 o'clock. Because they may skip the meeting because they think, well, if I'm not there by 3 or 3:30, I'll miss it.
That's true.
Stacy, please, and come on up so we can hear you on the microphone.
I actually don't have anything to offer. I just noticed that Dan Folk has got his hand raised, so I think he
Okay.
wanted to weigh in on
Thank you.
perhaps Councilmember House's comment.
Yeah, Dan Folk, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I've been listening intently all day, and we do have funds in our budget for code review. It was co-funded through sustainability and housing. Those teams are also working with Michelle McNulty on our land availability suitability study. And so we've prepared an RSOQ, which is a request for statements of qualifications for consultant for those two projects, the code review and then the land availability study. We're giving an option for one consultant team to put teams together and do it together, or to do proposals on each one separately. And so we're in the very last stages of getting that RSOQ approved. And we're going to put that out here and hopefully have a consultant on board later this year. And then this code review is what will lead to code amendments that I know has come up in the last few weeks as well.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Are you wearing flannel today?
I'm not, and when I put this on, I was realizing you're probably going to want to see some flannel. I mean, there's nothing more comfortable than flannel, especially on a snowy day.
Yeah, nothing better than flannel. Thank you.
But I am
for your-
comfortable, thank you. And I hope everyone's staying safe and warm.
For the record, Dan is in his bathrobe.
I think what you're wearing.
Yes, just a follow-up on Councilmember McCarthy's comment. While we just saw a meeting where we couldn't take up an item until 7 p.m. due to legal reasons, there's no reason you can't do that with other weighty, controversial, whatever you want to call them, agenda items. And then if we get to that point, move on to the next, as we did.
And we have done that.
We have done that in the past. You can, just kind of work with it as you go through this meeting. So,
Thank you, Strong. Other thoughts? Mayor, I'm looking your way.
All right. Councilmember Harris, I love the idea of going to the different meetings to connect with people, and thank you for thinking of that and doing that. And I think all of us could probably think of spheres of influence where we could do the same thing and just make sure that people feel comfortable talking to us, which I think they do, because we already talk to people when we're out and about, but just being very conscious about it. And then channeling my best Adam Shimoni, I'm wondering whether we have a priority-based budgeting video that walks someone through the steps that Chris took us through.
Chris, come on up and talk about the video. Are you a star in this video?
No, it was before my time. Luckily, no, we do have a priority-based budget video that goes through those steps. We can show it if you like. It's on our website, but it was produced a few years back.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank
How
you.
long is it?
2 or 3 minutes maybe?
Oh, I got a text from Adam.
Hi, everybody. I'm here.
You let him in as a guest? Really?
No, I'm just kidding. That was priceless. It should pass up the website.
I'm also keenly supportive and interested in employee pay and benefits. And I think that warrants just saying every time we're talking about it, so that staff clearly understands that is a priority for us. And of course, the flooding infrastructure to avoid further damage to homes and city facilities. And I'm understanding that our fire department is that we've fallen behind, it seems, in acquiring the necessary equipment. So keeping that up there. Housing always. And I'm really looking forward to the bond project discussion and getting a timeline. And also hearing for both 441 and 442 what this city is going to do to ensure that what we promised is what is going to get built, because we hear that a lot from the community. So I would like that as part of the presentation. And there's nothing really that's not a priority, which is why all of this is so expensive.
These are, if you don't mind me editorializing, I think very exciting times for an elected body to be leading a community with so much on the table. Very exciting, daunting, but exciting. Thank you, Mayor. Vice Mayor, got your title right.
I really find myself in synergy with these big picture priorities. These are big picture priorities, right? I'm not sure if facility security exactly falls into that category. It seems a little bit more niche than that. Obviously very important, and I'm so glad we had very smart people thinking about that and being proactive. It's definitely something to keep an eye on and something that we don't want to react to, right? So capital projects, absolutely. Wastewater, absolutely. I really want to put an extra green sticker next to what Councilmember McCarthy said about how we treat our wastewater and our reclaimed water. These investments, we're on the cusp of some really exciting times in terms of technology investment, advancements, and emerging strategies around water conservation. We're also in a very dangerous, risky time in terms of water availability and water conservation necessity throughout the desert Southwest and beyond. And I'll keep some of my own particular pet projects off this list for now. I've talked a lot about film promotion, but that's very, very much into the weeds. There's other things I could mention too. What I'm disappointed not to see up here is just already written down as something that's a given is our big shift policies. And I don't want to be confused with some of the very contentious voices that have been coming up all through the woodwork this week because of this particular weather event. But I do think that, I've had the privilege of not having to drive around very much this week. But I have been on the roads a couple times throughout the days. And what is very clear to me, and again, I want to decouple this from the severity of the particular weather event that we're experiencing. But, we talk about Flagstaff being a four-season town, and I'm one of the first people to acknowledge that. We're also a mountainous town, and we're also an older town. So not driving is not going to be a strategy for everybody. But we are also not a town of only seasonal multimodal users. This week, I have seen so many pedestrians climbing over berms, struggling to get on sidewalks, struggling to cross the street and crosswalks, walking down the middle of streets, including, Woodland. Just yesterday, over by Walmart, or Home Depot. What's that? South Woodland, right? In Milton. This is not something. This is not a pet project that we do on behalf of a niche community in Flagstaff that like to bike and walk during the winter. This is a significant portion of our very stable year-long community who are not used to getting around in cars at any time of the year and find themselves totally marginalized and in very dangerous and precarious situations during events like this. Now, this is a big event. We don't know what to do with the snow that's fallen this week, and that has created particular challenges. I've heard anything that, depending on where you're at in town, that this was the 12th largest on record snowfall event since 1899, up to the 22nd largest event since 1899. That still means something like this is happening once every 10 years, even if most events are smaller. And we need to get beyond the idea of bike project on Butler and how do we keep that clean. If we're really talking about this big shift policy, it needs to permeate and it needs to be a part of our budget document. It needs to be part of the moral framework of what we're investing in this town. And so strategies and equipment and resources for getting not only the streets clear, but the other pathways for transportation clear in our town immediately really needs to be front and center. And I don't know, maybe I've misread what Rick was talking about. But even if this is just serves as an example, if we have a $5 million revenue surplus right now, and we don't like to spend that stuff on ongoing things, we do have an opportunity to buy some more equipment and buy some more specialized equipment for sidewalks and for street crossings, things like that. It's really hit me on the head this week driving around how many individual Flagstaff residents are just, it's like coming out of the woodwork. Like these people are walking on the streets with cars that are sliding around. And it's the only path they have available. And we need to do better by them. That's in general throughout the year, but part of the strategy of making alternative modes of transportation to cars available is making sure it's for season, it's throughout the year, and that it's responsive immediately to the same events that we deal with car, and again, this event is a lightning pole for this, but it's not indicative. It's just an example. Our streets aren't even clear yet, so it's not like we're prioritizing one thing over the other. We're just behind, up to our knees, literally, in this problem in general. But the number of people who are not in vehicles and still trying to get through town throughout the day is really astonishing to me. So I would hope that we could maintain some focus on that too and get Sam the equipment he needs. Obviously, there's other workforce considerations, that may be seasonal for that too. But it's just really important.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, for giving me a quick line there. On the big shift, we're asking for big picture priorities, of course. Rest assured that one is priority and has been articulated as such by this council and the previous council, and it hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, it's moving forward. I'm seeing in the request coming forward to the budget team references to this resource allocation and a number of other things. So it's very much alive and doing well. But you raised a number of other points that that also follow up to that or are related to that, and they need to be addressed as well. This storm has packed a pretty good punch. I think 4 out of the last 5 days we've had snowfall, and 3 of those days have been over 12 inches of snowfall. Not to provide any excuses, but this storm has been a good storm. And take note that the weather report today said that the warning expired at 2 o'clock. So I think we should expect to see blue skies and sunshine here, but it's not exactly happening. But yeah, it has been. And I've seen what you've seen. Pedestrians are struggling. Kids going to school are struggling right now. The sidewalks are not clear. Yeah, it's been a challenge. Thank you for your comments.
I think that includes the foot trails too. I might as well take a second to mention that. I think it's the HOA that takes care of it in my neighborhood. They usually are very good at doing that within 24 to 48 hours of even a big flood. The foot trails get cleared, and people, recreationists and walkers and dog walkers are able to use those joggers immediately. That should be just standard practice throughout the entirety of our networks.
I would disagree.
And it's a matter of resources.
Yes. Stay tuned for a lot of very important discussions and updates on this in the big shift. We're channeling Adam Shimoni here. I'm waiting to hear that booming voice come across. So,
Thank you.
Not exactly booming, but. Other comments? Other comments by anybody in the room or online, please?
I was just going to make a suggestion. I've always tried to think outside of the box, but we have a lot of people who would help. Do we have any way of doing, like temporary workers, people like that? Because what I'm thinking about is, a lot of students came back, a lot of our fraternities, they could get rid of some of that excess energy that they might have stored up somewhere so they not get in trouble during this time. But I'm just wondering, is there a way to hire temporary workers, through a company or something? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, and we do. We have a lot of temporary employees. Can we do more creative things? I think so. There's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of years, council member, about really enhancing our internship opportunities at the city. We have a great university and a great community college in our community, and are we doing enough to provide for temporary work arrangements with students? They can come in, maybe earn a little bit of a stipend, possibly get some college credit, do something meaningful to enhance their curriculum. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Thank you for that. Other comments or questions? How are we doing time-wise, Ms. Facilitator?
Well, I didn't have a time for this discussion, so we're at 3:11 now.
We were supposed to be done. Rick took us over, I know.
No, I got gold stars today.
We nearing time maybe to open it up to see if there's any public participation. This is a good time, Mayor, for me to turn it back over to you. And gosh, it's Friday afternoon. Do your mayoral things and bring this meeting to closure, Mayor.
Betcha. So at this time, I would like to call for any public participation.
Mayor, we do have one online public participation. Mr. Adam Shimoni, if you want to go ahead and unmute and turn your camera on, you do have 3 minutes.
With a booming voice, please.
Hey, everybody. Let me go ahead and start my 3-minute timer. How about that? Good afternoon, Mayor and Vice Mayor and City Council members, staff and leadership, members of the public. It's great to be here with you. What a awesome 2-day retreat you all just had. Felt like I was with you all the whole time and really appreciate all the great insights and conversations that were had. I'm actually speaking to you today as a board member of the Flagstaff Biking Organization, and on behalf of the board with my comments. I think a lot of you might have seen my letter that is speaking to the Transportation Commission letter of support for funding that Councilmember McCarthy knows all too well about, that the Bicycle Advisory Committee and the Pedestrian Advisory Committee are all signing on to. So I just bring that up to mention that I really hope that that could be part of your next budget retreat conversation, because it does outline 3 new positions and where those positions would sit, and also funding for the big shift, thank you, Vice Mayor, and Vision Zero, programming moving forward. There are also 5 key projects that the last council funded at a 15% design, and they include the Butler bike pilot and the elevation of those lanes that would allow for easier, more efficient snow maintenance. Because even if we had the equipment, I think Sam could agree, we're not going to be able to maintain those to the same priority that I think our community needs us to. So with a 10-foot wide foot trail along Butler Street, not only do we have separated infrastructure, but we have the ability to maintain easily within parks. And so that's one of the 5 key projects. But there's small money relative to engineering projects, but I really hope that those 5 key projects could be discussed at your next budget retreat. And then in regards to maintenance, I don't know if this is the right time to really provide this comment, but I do wonder how many passes have been made at bike and pedestrian routes versus vehicle routes. My guess is close to none. I think the pedestrians are really struggling. Thank you, Vice Mayor and others who spoke to that. I've witnessed them. I've been part of their category. And I just don't see us as a city addressing those. So I'm not sure if that's a budget discussion or not, but if it is, I'd love for that to be part of the discussion and have those priorities match the priorities that are being set in our engineering standards and road designs. But just wanted to add those comments. Wonderful job, everyone. Welcome to the new mayor and council, and go enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you, staff, and thank you, everybody. 2 minutes, 40 seconds. How's that? That's worth celebrating. See you.
Thank you, Mr. Shimoni.
Thank you all.
Mayor, I did not have any other public commenters. All right, thank you so much. Well, thank you all for a wonderful 2 days. This was fantastic, and I think a great way to welcome new council members into the fold. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And we are adjourned.
Yeah, that gets around the